Chapter 8:15. It was a pillar, a huge and towering black pillar which ran through the sky and the earth just like the legendary Mount Buzhou in the Age of Desolation. Thump. Thousands of miles away, the nine-tailed fox involuntarily fell to the ground. Then she opened her mouth and moaned in a hoarse voice that was not like her at all. Reverse, reverse the Gisaurus pillar. Run, everyone, run as far away as possible. The nine-tailed fox didn't care about exposing herself at all and issued a warning to the people thousands of miles away. Then she took Qionghua's hand, launched her teleportation technique, and retreated further away, as if the distance of thousands of miles was still far from enough. The next moment, Supreme Tianluan in the sky heard the fox's voice. He waved the trap immortal sword in his right hand and secretly made a divination with his left hand. There was no strange phenomenon. According to the result of the divination, this would be a brilliant victory. Then he frowned slightly and said something to the disciple of 10,000 Arts sect who was behind him to help with the calculation. Let's go. The reason was very simple. In the face of immortals, any calculation could be wrong. The other party didn't even need to deliberately deceive the mystery of heaven. The existence of immortals itself was a great interference to calculation and deduction. Therefore, in addition to calculation, there must be a basic logical judgment. The opponent of this battle was not just one or two immortals, but the entire fallen immortal world. The passage between the two worlds was open, and new immortals might come to support them at any time. How could the 9 regions side win a brilliant victory? Moreover, according to the previous discussion with several elders of Heavenly Sage Hall, it was not difficult to draw the following judgment: the fallen immortals attached great importance to the great purge of 9 regions and were also very cautious. For this reason, they did not hesitate to spend thousands of years to prepare for the layout. This could be seen from the arrival of Mr. Fengyu in 9 regions 2,000 years ago. And this caution sometimes even reached the point of fear. Not to mention that during the 2,000 years when Mr. Fengyu was accidentally trapped in 9 regions, the fallen immortal world actually stood by and watched. How many times had the passage between the two worlds been opened? Including this time, it was already the 4th time. The first time was when Mr. Fengyu was in Blue River region. At that time he had already opened the tunnel, but there was no one to continue it. Soon, the Lingjian school sacrificed itself to seal the tunnel, so it was not difficult to determine that the opening of the tunnel was very likely to be a test. Both the capacity and the stability of the tunnel were very poor, and it was not really for practical use. The second time was the descent of the Kanglan Immortal. That time, it was proven to be a failure of the immortal world. Forcefully descending had greatly weakened the immortal world, causing a dignified immortal venerable to be captured alive by a group of rabble and reduced to a lowly existence. The third time was the arrival of the immortal world's little princess, Xia Xiaohe. This time, the immortal world had finally opened up a stable passageway that allowed immortals to pass through normally. However, the immortal world's army did not appear immediately. The vanguard was just a small group of soldiers. The main force of the immortal world did not appear at all. Clearly, they were extremely fearful of the previous 3 defeats. But this time it was the 4th time. What reason did the immortal world have to fear? Was there any reason not to send their main force? In the face of the main force of the immortal world, how could 9 regions win a brilliant victory? The main force of 9 regions was trapped in the endless void. Therefore, Supreme Tianluan naturally made a judgment that his heaven's calculation was simply deceived by others. Now he must leave immediately. At the same time, Supreme Kuqin, who had severely injured Taiyuan in the great array of moving the mountains and filling the seas, also had a foreboding, and she also heard the words of Supreme Tianluan. But to leave? Could they leave? Right now, the advantage on the battlefield came from the great array of moving the mountains and filling the seas. If they turned around and left, the great array would collapse by itself. At that time, once the power of the immortals came after them, who could escape? Soldiers could not show their back to the enemy. This was not only a pursuit of honor, but also the crystallization of countless blood and tears in actual combat. But if they didn't leave, should they just wait for death here? The Red Guards were one of the 4 extremes of 9 regions. The Extinguish Immortal Sword in her hand and the Trap Immortal Sword of Supreme Tianluan were the key components of the Death to Immortal Sword array, so they must not be lost. This moment of hesitation also involved Supreme Tianluan. Although he judged that they should leave if Kuqin didn't move, how could he move first? At this time, the Extinguish Immortal Sword and the Trap Immortal Sword had been faintly integrated into one, and the great array of moving the mountains and filling the seas and the Red Guards were also inseparable. Moreover, his judgment was, after all, just a guess and he was not fully sure. As the god of war of 9 regions, Supreme Kuchin's decisiveness was recognized by the world. If she judged that they should stay, then perhaps they really should stay. Just when Supreme Tianluan began to hesitate, the voice of Tetragon sounded in his ear. What's going on? Supreme Tianluan was surprised and said, Why are you here? Where are the two fallen immortals? The two people suddenly retreated. Just when the giant pillar descended, they opened the passage and disappeared without a trace. Supreme Tianluan frowned and said, I used the great array of moving the mountains and filling the seas to suppress the space here. They can't run out. The only gap is the passage between the two worlds. They can only return to the immortal world. So, not good. At this point, Supreme Tianluan no longer doubted that the giant pillar that ran through the sky was the big killer weapon used by the immortal world to clear the battlefield. That was why Sun Yicheng and Ruoyuo fled in a hurry. They must escape from this place at all costs. At this time there was finally a change in the giant pillar. A white aperture lit up at the top of the giant pillar and quickly slid down. The aperture reflected the surface of the giant pillar. The rough periphery was engraved with complex patterns. If one looked closely, one could find that it was a picture scroll, which depicted the doomsday scene. There were landslides, lightning flashes, and thunder rolls. The picture scroll depicted the destruction of many worlds, and the tragic death of hundreds of millions of creatures because of the destruction of their homes. The desperate faces were vividly restored on the stone pillar. As the aperture moved, the picture scroll also seemed to move, and the destruction of countless worlds seemed to be close at hand. In the great array of moving the mountains and filling the seas, Taiyuan suddenly roared in horror, let me go, otherwise everyone will die. At this time he was being suppressed by the Black Rock Mountain and could not move at all. Just a moment ago he would rather die than surrender, but at this time he kept begging for mercy in horror. The contrast was so strong that it was shocking. After Taiyuan shouted, the aperture suddenly accelerated its descent and penetrated the earth in the blink of an eye. Then the earth began to collapse. It began to spread rapidly from the edge of the giant pillar. The earth was torn apart and the soil and rocks fell down like a waterfall, never seeing the end. Eventually only a deep dark hole was left. It was as if in the endless depths of the earth, there was a giant beast with endless suction that swallowed the earth. This wave of destruction only took an instant to engulf a radius of 1,000 miles. On the 9 regions, there was an endless deep pit with a radius of thousands of miles. Everything that once stood on this land no longer existed. What the hell is that? Above the clouds, in the astral wind layer of the 9th heaven, Supreme Tianluan was stunned to see what happened under his feet. Behind him, Supreme Kuchin, Tetragon, and the others also had a lingering fear. Just now they had decided to retreat regardless of everything, but the surrounding space was locked. If it weren't for Supreme Tianluan's desperate breakthrough at the critical moment, perhaps that aperture just now would have been enough to wipe them out. One blow swallowed thousands of miles of land, and the destruction was so thorough. This was an unimaginable burst of energy. However, their escape was not without cost. Supreme Tianluan's body trembled, and the trap immortal sword in his hand was dim. Because of the great collapse just now, the thousands of mountains and rivers gathered by the move the mountains and fill the sea were completely wiped out, leaving nothing behind. Even Taiyuan, who was suppressed by the Black Stone Mountain, disappeared without a trace. The great array of move the mountains and fill the sea of 9 regions was broken in an instant. As the absolute core of the move the mountains and fill the sea, the trap immortal sword was naturally greatly affected. If it were not a peak immortal treasure, perhaps it would have been destroyed a long time ago. Fortunately, Supreme Kuchin put up the Extinguish Immortal Sword in time. The two immortal swords of the same origin began to merge and share with each other. A moment later, the Extinguish Immortal Sword also dimmed a little, while the Trap Immortal Sword came out of danger and regained its vitality. But, Supreme Tianluan asked, what should we do next? Supreme Kuchin said, Tetragon, have you ever seen this thing before? Not at all. Kuchin pondered for a moment and said, do you think it's possible for us to take the initiative to attack and cut off this giant pillar? What? The power of the halo just now is indeed unparalleled, but on the one hand, its killing range is limited, and it can only affect one side. Moreover, the interval between each activation seems to be not short. If we are flexible, we may be able to avoid the killing of the halo. Secondly, although the stone pillar is infinitely powerful, its body is not indestructible. Just now, I saw carefully that the carvings on the surface of the stone pillar have been damaged. So, if we can fight back once, maybe? Supreme Kuchin's words came to an abrupt end, because in front of her eyes, an incredible scene appeared. On the surface of the giant pillar that ran through the sky, thousands of halos lit up at the same time. That group of idiots, at this moment the nine-tailed fox who had already fled to the central region, looked at the direction of the southern heaven region tens of thousands of miles away in surprise and anger. That's the defying Gisaurus pillar used by the immortal world to destroy a big world. What the hell are you guys thinking? Unfortunately, after this great collapse, it was too late to say anything. The defying Gisaurus pillar could even destroy the world. Under the light no one could survive. Alas, the natives of 9 regions still can't stop the immortals from the upper realm. The fox girl sighed inwardly and began to reconsider the previous problem of job hopping. However, before she could think too much, someone behind her urged, "What about your spell? Let's see what's going on in the southern heaven region." The fox girl pursed her lips and didn't object. She stretched out her hand and drew a box. The picture in the box blurred for a while and then showed a piece of darkness. Zhanzai tremblingly asked, "What is this?" "The southern heaven region." The fox girl said, "After being bombarded by the defying Gisaurus pillar, everything will disappear. From the astral wind in the 9th heaven to the 9th hell, everything will be erased. Now 9 regions can basically be renamed to 8 regions, and the southern heaven region will soon be removed." Chapter 8:16. The eruption of the reversed Gisaurus pillar, the complete destruction of the southern heaven region. The 9-tailed fox calmly gave the answer. "So, if you want to ask me what this is, I want to say that this is the prelude to the collapse of 9 regions. Enough. I didn't ask you about the southern heaven region." Zhanzai suddenly broke out, "I asked you what happened to my master." The fox girl was unmoved and calmly gave the answer, "What else can he do? Of course he's dead. Impossible. It's impossible for him to survive. Even the senior immortal himself can't withstand the destructive light of the reversed Gisaurus pillar. How could other people survive?" Zhanzai's eyes turned red, but he was speechless, because he knew that the 9-tailed fox was right. The power of the reversed Gisaurus pillar could be clearly sensed from thousands of miles away. It was the supreme law above all the laws in 9 regions. It was impossible for anyone to survive from it. Although he absolutely didn't want to believe such a fact, although he wanted to yell at the 9-tailed fox and scold her for talking nonsense, so what if he did that? Zhanzai suddenly remembered that a few years ago, when he was less than 10 years old, he was accepted as a disciple by the 10,000 Arts sect. Then, above the clouds, Supreme Tianluan personally gave the first lesson to the new disciples, which was about the spirit of the 10,000 Arts sect, respect for the facts. On the road of immortal cultivation, we will face all kinds of disturbances. But as a cultivator of 10,000 Arts sect, you must always keep calm and eliminate all subjective emotional interference. No matter how much resistance you have in your heart, you must keep in mind that objective facts are more important than anything else. For most of the disciples of 10,000 Arts sect, that was probably the only time in their immortal cultivation life that they could hear Supreme Tianluan personally give a lecture. Of course, as the lead disciple of 10,000 Arts sect, Zhanzai spent a lot more time with Supreme Tianluan. However, in the past few decades, his deepest impression was still the first lesson. Supreme Tianluan implanted the seed of the spirit of the 10,000 Arts sect in the heart of every disciple. Later, when he cultivated the 10,000 motionless immortal heart, that seed broke out of the ground and thrived. However, at this moment, Zhanzai hated his calm immortal heart. He would rather be as ignorant as those idiots who knew the truth of his master's death so clearly and painfully. Wait a minute, in that case Supreme Tianluan, Supreme Kuchin, Tetragon and the others, Extinguish Immortal Sword and Trap Immortal Sword have all? Zhou was horrified and said, "That's close to half of the power of 9 regions. The 9-tailed fox coldly said, "Even if all the power of 9 regions is gathered, it's useless. The power of the reversed Gisaurus pillar is also the top among the innate treasures. Even the immortal king would not dare to face it head-on. They missed their only chance to escape just now, so what's so strange about them being wiped out? If that's the case, The more Zhou spoke, the paler her face became. Even if she wasn't a cultivator proficient in divination, she didn't need any divination to know what would happen next. Without 2 of the 4 poles, the death to immortal sword array could not be formed, and the southern heaven region was destroyed by the reversed Gisaurus pillar. What qualification did such a 9 regions have to fight against the fallen immortals? There's no other way. We can't afford to make any mistakes." The 9-tailed fox sighed and said, "The fallen immortals can fail 10 or 20 times, but as long as 9 regions makes a slight mistake, it will be beyond redemption." The fox girl's words made everyone quiet down, and the despair and cold mood began to spread gradually. Yes, they were one of the 4 poles of 9 regions, the elites that Wang Lu had spent countless efforts to create. Their morale should always be high. However, in the face of such a situation, if they still couldn't rationally recognize the despair, then they would really be too ignorant. So, are you going to surrender? Qiong Hua looked at the 9-tailed fox coldly and said, "The 9-tailed fox who always stands on the side of the winner, is going to return to the embrace of the immortal world? Haha, what are you talking about? I've been one of you for a long time, loyal and unswerving." Qiong Hua said, "Really? Even when Supreme Kuqin, Supreme Tianluan, and the others were all wiped out, even when Wang Lu and Wang Wu were lost in the endless void, and 9 regions was in unprecedented despair, are you still willing to stand firmly on our side?" This 9-tailed celestial fox looked troubled. The feeling of being forced to lie was really not very pleasant. Fortunately, at this time someone came forward to help her out. Zhu Shiyao suddenly opened her mouth and said in confusion, "Wait a minute, what are you guys talking about?" Qiong Hua looked at her and had nothing to say about this comrade who had nothing but swordsmanship. At this time she still didn't understand the situation. Perhaps it was a kind of happiness. They are not completely wiped out. What? All of a sudden, everyone gathered around and stared at Zhu Shiyao. Although this eldest sister of the Spirit Sword sect was a person of few words, and often spoke incoherently, she rarely spoke without a target in mind. Zhu Shiyao felt a bit strange and said, "Can't you see it? They're over there." Where? Following the direction of Zhu Shiyao's finger, everyone looked through the fox's spell to the dark place in the southern heaven region. There's nothing there. Did she see it wrong? She has stellar divine eyes. Stop talking nonsense and look at it. I seem to see it, there's indeed a little bit. Fox, zoom in a little bit. The 9-tailed fox also came closer in disbelief, and then tried her best to enlarge the picture in the frame again and again. Separated by tens of thousands of miles, and also peeping at the situation around the reversed Gisaurus pillar, this spell was very difficult for her. However, at this time she didn't even have time to shake her own foundation and desperately enlarge the picture. It was a person. Supreme Kuqin, with the extinguished immortal in her right hand and the military flag in her left, stood in the dark void. Only immortal Kuqin? Where is my master? Zhanzai, calm down. Look at the military flag in her hand, there are a lot more marks than at the beginning. The others must have been taken into the military flag. Upon hearing this, Zhanzai's heart suddenly fell. The 10,000 laws motionless immortal heart once again took the initiative, making him sober and calm. It's good that the people are still there, but why? The pillar is broken. Zhu Shiyao said and pointed to the dark dragon pillar. Look at the bottom. While spitting out blood, the fox magnified the picture a bit more. Sure enough, there was a deep gap at the bottom of the dragon pillar, which almost cut the dragon pillar in half. And Supreme Kuqin stood not far in front of the gap. The pilots present were all talented genius cultivators, and they quickly filled in everything that had just happened in their minds. At the moment when the reversed Gisaurus pillar broke out, Supreme Kuqin burst out with amazing decisiveness. Instead of retreating, she moved forward. She took everyone into the military flag and then instantly moved to the front of the dragon pillar. She used the extinguish immortal sword to destroy the dragon pillar, so that the explosive power of the halo was sharply reduced. Only then did she have a chance to escape. She is indeed the 9 regions god of war. She actually managed to escape from a desperate situation. Zhou Mumu wiped the cold sweat from her forehead and said with admiration. Zhu Shiyao frowned again and said, "Escaped? But she's dead." What? The next moment, the scene in the square frame changed again. Supreme Kuqin's body suddenly scattered like sand. The extinguished immortal sword and the military flag dimmed and fell down alone. On the way down, the military flag gradually dissipated from top to bottom, and half of the symbol on the flag was lost. In the end, it was not perfect. Supreme Kuqin's reaction was fast enough, but perhaps it was not fast enough. And in this battle where the weak fought the strong, the slightest mistake could lead to life and death. How could this be? Zhou Mumu looked at the remaining half of the military flag in a daze. She could see very clearly that the symbol of Supreme Tianluan had disappeared. Among the Dixian, only Tetragon and Luo Shui survived. Indeed, this was not a total annihilation, but what was the difference between that and total annihilation? The 2 Supremes died in battle and most of the Dixian were killed. It seemed that the extinguish immortal sword, the trap immortal sword, and the red guard flag would all be lost in the reversed Gisaurus pillar. Giving people hope and then making them despair, this was really too cruel. Everyone get into formation and lend me a hand. Hua's cold voice was like a bucket of wisdom, dispelling the haze in everyone's heart. The dead are gone and the living have to continue to fight. The extinguish immortal sword, the trap immortal sword, and the red guard flag must not be left there, so. With that, Hua took out her kill immortal sword. The 4 kill immortal swords are connected by blood. I can use the kill immortal sword as the core to call the other 2 swords back. The trap immortal sword is in the red guard flag, so it should be able to attract them. However, the distance here is too far, and there is the interference of the reverse Gisaurus pillar, so I can't do it alone. Almost as soon as her voice fell, Hua felt the support from her comrades in arms. She immediately took out the kill immortal sword and began to summon the extinguish immortal sword and the trap immortal sword. Tens of thousands of miles away in the endless darkness, the 2 immortal treasures stopped falling at the same time, and then began to fly up slowly, faster and faster. However, before they could fly far, their momentum came to an abrupt halt. An invisible big hand shrouded them and grasped the 2 immortal treasures. In the central region, Hua's delicate body trembled, and blood flowed out of her 7 orifices involuntarily. The strength of the person who cast the invisible hand was unbelievably tyrannical. The real body hadn't arrived, but just the projection alone had almost collapsed the joint forces of the 11 of them on the spot. It was simply suicide to wrestle with such a force. So, in an instant, the 2 immortal treasures gradually flew backward, getting farther and farther away from the central region. In the formation, Zhou Mumu roared, "Come on, Hua. What happened to your insufferably arrogant attitude back then?" Hua clenched her teeth, and then reversed her heart meridians, forcing out a mouthful of heart blood and sprinkling it on the kill immortal sword. The kill immortal sword suddenly issued a cheerful sword cry, and its suction sword, forcibly forming a balance with the big hand. However, the next moment, the big hand suddenly doubled in size, and its power instantly occupied an overwhelming advantage. Hua's move of sacrificing her lifespan was actually ineffective. Since 1 mouthful is not enough, then I'll use more blood. At this moment, Hua made a simple judgment in her heart. The current 9 regions could live without Hua, but it absolutely could not live without those 2 immortal treasures. Therefore, at this time, a familiar and intimate voice resounded throughout the southern heaven region. "Let go." A strange sword light cut through the darkness and cut the invisible hand in half. The force that bound the extinguish immortal sword and the military flag suddenly disappeared. The 2 immortal treasures were instantly pulled by the power from the central region, as fast as a meteor. On the edge of the southern heaven region, Supreme Hichu, holding a cyan sword, looked at the endless darkness in front of him with a solemn expression. Just now he succeeded with his sword strike, but there was no joy in him at all. In this desperate war, a small victory was simply insignificant. In front of him, the big hand that was cut off was glued together in the darkness, not damaged at all. In the face of the new enemy, it did not have the slightest bit of vigilance and fear. The gigantic hand that blotted out the sky gradually approached. The closer it got, the more frightening the shockwave became. Supreme Hichu's face remained unchanged, but his back was soaked with cold sweat. Even with the power of the 9 regions map and the kill immortal sword, he was still far from being able to match this enemy. However, he had no choice. However, at this time, a sudden voice brought a turning point to the situation on the field. "Xiaoyao, I advise you to restrain yourself a bit or else I'll go over." The large hand immediately retracted and lifted upwards, as if it was sealing up some sort of gap. With the movement of the big hand, the voice never appeared again. However, that short sentence was enough to ignite a glimmer of hope in people's hearts. It was the voice of Wang Lu. Chapter 8:17. Haha, persuading people to restrain themselves a bit? I can give you 95 points for this pretentious act. Even if you satirize me, I won't feel guilty, so save it? In that situation just now, if I didn't forcefully act, Hichu would be in danger. What does Hichu's danger have to do with you? You're not really his illegitimate child, are you? In the passage between the 2 worlds, Wang Lu and his master sat back to back on the ground. Their faces were full of exhaustion. It was difficult for them to continue their daily quarrel with each other after only 2 sentences. After a long time, Wang Wu looked up at the sky and said, "What a pity, I was so close to going home." "So close? You're forcing yourself to be optimistic. Just now, the reverse Gisaurus pillar in the immortal world did shatter the space, but the gap can only allow sound to pass through at most. If you want the body to pass through, you need to expand the gap by at least 10,000 times. Of course, according to the current situation, it's useless to expand it by 100,000 times. The gap has been closed." Wang Wu reluctantly raised her spirit and scolded, So, what's wrong with you just now? Why did you have to open your mouth? If you didn't say it, who would know that the reversed G-Saurus pillar had shaken a gap in the space barrier? Even if the hope is slim, it's better than no hope at all. Wang Lu smiled and said, "You think the fallen immortals are stupid? Even if I don't speak, they will carry out a comprehensive investigation sooner or later. This reversed G-Saurus pillar is one of the core elements of the Great Purge. Think about it, before this dragon pillar came, how much did the immortal world do? Moreover, if I didn't speak just now, Hichu would directly confront Xiaoyao. Judging from the current situation of 9 regions, it would be a dead end. If they're all dead, what's the point of you and I going back? If the death to immortal sword array can be set up smoothly, it should be useful for the two of us. Although it's just a deathbed struggle." Deathbed struggle? The power of the reversed G-Saurus pillar, even if there are 10 sets of death to immortal sword array, it would still be difficult to contend against it head-on. Moreover, the most important logistics base in 9 regions, the group of immortal tombs, has been destroyed. Let alone the death to immortal sword array, many production lines have to stop. Forget it, there are too many bad news, I'm too lazy to say it. After that, the tunnel was silent for a very long time. Wang Wu sighed. "So, we have no chance?" Wang Lu did not reply. He remained silent. Wang Wu said softly, "We've worked so hard for so long and this is the result. It's really discouraging." Wang Lu said with a smile, "Don't be in a hurry to be discouraged. You see, although the passage between the two worlds is narrow and constantly shrinking, it's actually quite spacious for 2 people. We can live happily here, and when we have time, we can reproduce in other people. Sure, if you want, I don't mind." "Ah?" Wang Lu was shocked. At the same time, he heard the rustling of clothes behind him. "Which position do you like?" After that, her warm body pressed against Wang Lu's back, and her 2 arms gently hugged Wang Lu's neck. Wang Lu sat up in shock and said, "What the hell, are you serious?" "What else?" Wang Wu said, "You're the one who said you want to do it? According to the normal script, you should take advantage of the situation to fight back. This kind of person's words is not your style." The corner of Wang Wu's mouth moved slightly. "Do you really think I like that style? There's only you and me here. I don't want to continue to be your master. It's so tiring." Wang Lu's heart suddenly surged with a complex feeling. "But since you're joking, then forget it." Wang Wu rearranged her clothes and said, "Tell me, what do you think now? What do you want to do? I'll do it. First of all, don't give up hope in a hurry. Thanks to the reversed G-Saurus pillar, I finally got a subtle connection with the 9 regions." "A subtle connection? Look at this." Wang Lu opened his hand and a faintly glowing talisman spread out on his palm. "Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman? You still have it with you?" "Well, although it's not actually useful, it's a souvenir after all. But now it comes in handy. With it, I can lock the position of the 9 regions. Although the feeling is very vague and the space barrier is still deep, at least I'm not drifting aimlessly in the endless void." Wang Wu pondered and said, "If you can lock the position of the 9 regions, then the only problem is the space barrier. The barrier distributed between the 3,000 worlds is one of the supreme laws, which is difficult to break through by brute force. Otherwise, the immortal world would not have to go through so much trouble to come to 9 regions. Fortunately, our location is not far from the 9 regions, so the barrier layer is not unbreakable, and it has been weakened by the reversed G-Saurus pillar. So, in theory, as long as I am 10 times stronger than I am now, I can break the barrier with my own strength and return to 9 regions." 10 times stronger? Is it possible to do that? Wang Lu said, "This is the difficulty. In theory, it's possible. My synchronization rate with the giant divine weapon is only more than 70%. If it can be improved to 100%, it can be 5 times stronger than it is now. What about the remaining 2 times? Find a way to improve it to more than 120%? What an irresponsible plan. And the most troublesome thing is that, according to the current synchronization rate improvement rate, it will take hundreds of years to reach 100%. But in fact, this passage between the 2 worlds can only last for 2 years at most. Even if I manage to maintain its existence with non-phase method, it will not last more than 3 years. Secondly, whether 9 regions can hold on until our return is also a problem. The war in Tianan has really hurt 9 regions a bit." Wang Wu was silent for a while and then said, "Don't underestimate the resilience of 9 regions. You are not the only savior in this world. Then could you please introduce me to my peers? I'd like to broaden my horizons." Wang Wu said with a smile, "Your tone is too arrogant. In the days when you're not here, senior brother Feng Yin is the savior of Lingjian School. Feng Yin Tsk, that little guy has indeed grown up a lot. In addition, senior brother Lu Xian and senior brother Feng He are also very hard-working. On the one hand, Supreme Hichu has to maintain the overall order of 9 regions. On the other hand, he has to play the role of the sect leader of Xingjing sect to protect the interests of the sect. For many years, the number 1 person in 9 regions has been working very hard. Okay, I know what you want to say. It's not easy for everyone, so I'll trust them for the time being. Wang Lu smiled helplessly and ended the topic. At this time there was no need to actively spread despair. After a while, a familiar warm touch came from his back, but a slightly strange tone came into his ears. However, for me the savior will always be you. 9 regions, Xingjing sect, Central Region. In the square outside the Heavenly Sage Hall, a grand funeral was in progress. The reversed Gisaurus pillar of the immortal world destroyed most of the southern heaven, and countless creatures disappeared. Among them, there were millions of cultivators and nearly 10,000 people above the King Pill level. Then there were also Supreme Tianluan, Supreme Kuchin, nearly half of the Red Guards and most of the Dixian warriors. After the war, nearly half of the 4 poles of 9 regions, which were the pride of 9 regions, were lost. This was an unprecedented funeral. Before this, the 9 regions had never experienced such a tragic situation. Even in the Great War of Immortals and Demons, there would not be so many dead in one day. Moreover, there were no bones left. Perhaps only the Age of Chaos could be comparable. This was a funeral that no one presided over, because even Supreme Hichu didn't know what to say. Or rather, even if he knew, he couldn't speak. In the face of such a tragic result, any words seemed pale and powerless. The funeral gathered hundreds of thousands of cultivators from all over the world. People came here silently and silently mourned for the dead. Outside the Heavenly Sage Hall, the atmosphere of grief and despair was suffocating. Inside the Heavenly Sage Hall, Hichu, Juri, Feng Yin, Tetragon, as well as the leaders and elders of the major sects gathered together to discuss the future in a heavy atmosphere. Next, we have to continue to fight. Supreme Hichu used such a sentence as an opening remark, not just for those who died but also for the living. We don't have the right to give up. One of the sect leaders below suddenly roared in despair, "What can we do if we continue to fight? You have squeezed the 9 regions for 15 years, but aren't you still defeated in one battle? If we surrender, maybe." Before he could finish his words, Feng Yin Taoist master shook his wrist. The next moment, the sect leader fell down without a sound. His vitality was gone and he was dead. There was a commotion below and everyone was surprised and uncertain. Now we don't need the noise of surrender. Supreme Hichu's words stopped the chaos. In fact, he didn't like Feng Yin's ruthless means. He was rigorous and serious by nature and liked to abide by the rules. However, he also knew that there was no other way in the situation just now. He couldn't think of any words to boost the morale, because even he too himself was desperate for a time. Thanks to Wang Lu's words, he could still persuade himself to keep a trace of hope. However, it was impossible to convince more people with just a sentence from Wang Lu. The panic, despair, and even numbness in the eyes of the elders present was human nature. In that case, he would just take one step at a time. Next, we will combine the 9 regions Great Array with the Death to Immortal Sword Array to form a mobile defense. In addition, the Red Sea Underwater Workshop must overcome the difficulty of the shortage of raw materials and continue to produce experimental machines. Also, Supreme Hichu's voice was a bit dry. Even he himself knew how futile these actions were now. In the battle in the Southern Heaven region, the main force was lost too much. The death of 2 Supremes and a large number of Dixian cultivators was fatal to the whole situation. Unless there was a miracle so that 9 regions would have a group of top experts in an instant, the situation was simply irreversible. At this time there was a sudden noise outside the Holy Hall. The next moment, the door of the Holy Hall was forcibly opened, and a golden light shone in the lobby. "Bastards!" A painful groan interrupted the opening remarks of the person. The next moment, next to the golden light, a blonde and blue-eyed Western Continent girl with heroic spirit withdrew her elbow that hit the abdomen of the other party and then steadily walked forward. "Everyone, I have invited the reinforcements from the Western Continent." Chapter 8:18. God bless 9 regions. When the golden light shone in the Heavenly Sage Hall, the people present all thought of these 4 words at the same time. The arrival of the Golden King of the Western Continent could be called a miracle. Before this, even the most delusional person dared not expect to be able to invite the demigod who stood at the top of the Western Continent to 9 regions. And in fact, the relationship between the 2 sides was not harmonious. In recent years, the exchanges between 9 regions and the Western continent had become more and more frequent. With the approaching crisis of the fallen immortal, 9 regions began to draw support from the Western continent. Under the matchmaking of the former Night King of the Western continent, people from all walks of life gathered in 9 regions, forming a strong force. However, this kind of drawing support was undoubtedly harmful to the Western continent, because the people of the Western continent also had to face the crisis of the end of the world. The descent of the gods of the Western continent was the same as the descent of the fallen immortals of 9 regions. Only by gathering the strength of the whole continent could they hope to survive. To put it bluntly, Aya running around the Western continent was tantamount to digging the corner of the Golden King, even pushing the Western continent into the fire pit. In the past few years, Aya's reputation in the Western continent has become subtle. Later, together with Wang Wu, she had a fierce confrontation with the Golden King, which made the once glorious and majestic Night King extremely controversial. However, it was also after that battle that the reinforcements from the 9 regions were no longer hindered. However, on the whole, the role of the foreign aid of the Western continent was actually quite limited. Although there were many people who came to support, there were very few experts worth mentioning. There was not even one whose strength was close to that of the Holy One. After all, 9 regions was not a peaceful paradise, it was even more dangerous than the Western continent. So why did everyone come all the way to 9 regions? Therefore, over the years, although Aya had been working hard in the Western continent, the cultivators of the Heavenly Sage Hall had long since stopped pinning their hopes on her. They only hoped that she could return to 9 regions during the decisive battle. Recently, they even completely lost contact with each other. Of course, Aya usually only contacted Wang Lu and Wang Wu, who knew that when 9 regions was in a desperate situation, she actually brought the Golden King back. This was truly a person who was better than thousands of men and horses. According to the information that Aya had reported back several times, the strength of Golden King even surpassed that of Sun Buping in the past. He was already very close to Wang Lu, who had a 70% synchronization rate, comparable to a senior immortal in the immortal world. What's more, as a king, how could Golden King travel alone? Who knew how many people had followed him here? In the face of the Supreme King of the Western continent, Supreme Hichu took the initiative to stand up and greet him with great courtesy. However, before he could speak, Golden King frowned with great displeasure. "Bastard, recognize your identity. Who do you think you are? Are you worthy of being on par with me? Where's Wang Lu?" Supreme Hichu was slightly stunned. He had heard a lot of stories about this Golden King, so he didn't mind the other party's rudeness, but the question raised by Golden King really poked his sore spot. At this moment, Supreme Hichu should not be on an equal footing with Golden King. When it came to the number 1 on the continent, Golden King was Western continent, while Wang Lu was 9 regions. But at this time Wang Lu was, Aya lightly said, "Wang Lu can't see you. He is trapped in the passage between the 2 realms and can't get out." Golden King's voice instantly turned cold. "Night King, are you kidding me? I won't joke about this kind of thing, and if not, I won't force you to come. 9 regions needs your strength. However, I don't need a 9 regions that can't even protect itself and can't keep its word." Golden King's cold anger gradually dissipated. "Let Wang Lu come to see me, otherwise, there's no need to talk about anything." Golden King's anger made the atmosphere in the Heavenly Sage Hall tense. However, Aya, who brought Golden King here, opposed him with equal harshness. "You can't see him and you don't have the right not to talk. Gil, you are no longer the Golden King. The Western continent is hopeless. Your only choice now is to help us survive this disaster, and then we will help you recover the Western continent. You have no choice. Night King." Golden King roared and countless golden rings lit up around him. Aya immediately put her hand on the hilt of the sword at her waist and said, "Gil, do you want to fight again?" Golden King glared at Aya. After a long time, he put away the rings around him, turned around and left without saying a word. His body disappeared without a trace like an illusion. Aya breathed a sigh of relief and loosened her grip on the hilt of the sword. Sweat flowed down her forehead. "Aya, what's going on?" Feng Yin asked with concern. "It's very complicated. In short, the Western continent has fallen." "Fallen?" Several elders of Heavenly Sage Hall were inexplicably surprised. "I haven't heard such news. The descent of the gods of the Western continent is different from that of the fallen immortals. They did not directly appear by force, but chose a relatively soft method. They constantly showed miracles to attract believers, and then gradually nibbled away the existing ruling class of the Western continent. Until they were in power, no one could stop the arrival of the end of the world." Aya said with a gloomy face, In terms of strength, the gods of the Western continent are much weaker than the fallen immortals. Because they killed each other excessively in the divine world, their number has withered. However, their means are more ingenious, so the process of occupying the Western continent is much smoother than that of the fallen immortals. When I left, they had already controlled the entire Western continent. Although they have not launched the final world-breaking technique, all those who noticed the abnormality and resisted have been secretly wiped out by them. The collapse of the Western continent is only a matter of time. When the elders heard this, their faces changed, and many of them cast grateful and admiring eyes on Tetragon. Were it not for this group of people who first carried the flag of rebellion and passed on the history and truth of the fallen immortals. In the future, when the fallen immortals also carried out a subtle occupation strategy in 9 regions in the name of the immortal world, 9 regions would probably not be any different from the Western continent. You just said that Golden King is no longer the Golden King. What do you mean by that? How much will his strength be affected? Aya said, the reason why a king is not because of his own nobility and strength, but because he has territory and people. Strictly speaking, a subjugated king can no longer be regarded as a king. As for strength, Golden King is the strongest person in the Western continent, but a large part of his strength comes from his identity as a king. Now he is probably slightly stronger than Tetragon. Tetragon, whose name was called, shook his head and asked, what about you? What kind of realm is the person who can make Golden King so afraid that he even gave up his dignity as a king? Upon hearing this, Aya was stunned. After a moment of silence, she said, Gil has never given up his dignity as a king. The reason why he listens to me is because I once made a bet with him. It's because I had a wager with him and won by half a move by a fluke. In terms of pure strength, I'm not much different from Gil. I'm afraid I'm still half a notch inferior to him. Tetragon smiled and said, at this stage it's difficult to make up for the gap in strength with skills, but you can actually win half a move against him. No wonder Wang Lu never forgot to say that you were his swordsman. Aya's face turned slightly red, but she didn't know how to respond. Tetragon, on the other hand, looked at Aya quite playfully, which made the latter feel more and more embarrassed. Supreme Hichu promptly said, all in all, with the addition of you and Golden King, the gap in strength can basically be filled. However, this only brings the front back to its original position. It doesn't mean that we can occupy any advantage. On the other hand, the fallen immortals have occupied the southern heaven region. The inverse Gisaurus pillar has completely taken root, and the passage between the 2 worlds has been fully opened. Every time Supreme Hichu said a word, the atmosphere in the heavenly sage hall became colder. The morale that was boosted by the arrival of Golden King was quickly extinguished. As Supreme Hichu had said, the current situation was far from optimistic. Bastards, are you going to give up? In the silence, Golden King came uninvited and appeared in the middle of the heavenly sage hall. If you are going to give up, then let me rule everything. Bastards, I give you the honor of submitting to me. Aya angrily said, Gil? Have you forgotten our agreement? Night King, I only agreed with you to respect those indomitable warriors in 9 regions. However, a group of bastards who cower and dare not face the enemy are not worthy of being called warriors, let alone worthy of my respect. Moreover, since the number 1 person in 9 regions, Wang Lu, is not here, then isn't it natural for me to rule everything? Or, on the surface you need my strength but you don't believe in my ability? Golden King's words made the people of 9 regions speechless. When everyone was silent, Golden King said, the power of the Emperor is increased by his subjects and territory. Since you need my strength, then you should contribute everything as subjects. But, suddenly Feng Yin Taoist Master said, okay. I'll leave it to you. Feng Yin, are you crazy? Feng Yin Taoist Master shook his head and said, right now, there is no conflict of interest between the 2 sides. Unnecessary vigilance will only hurt others and hurt ourselves. The power of Golden King is indeed unparalleled, and he himself is the peerless emperor who rules the whole continent. So, why not let him lead the overall situation? Everyone, more than 10 years ago when you entrusted everything to Wang Lu, what's the difference between now and now? Humph, it's rare to have a reasonable person. Golden King said with an evil smile. After a moment, Supreme Hichu also said, I don't object to the opinion of Taoist Feng Yin. Supreme Jury obviously disagreed with this, but since both Feng Yin and Hichu had spoken, he no longer spoke. However, just as everyone began to think and express their stance, a harsh alarm suddenly sounded in the heavenly sage hall. The 3rd crack in the sky has been opened. Chapter 8:19. Above Cloud Region, an ugly scar that stretched for thousands of miles occupied half of the sky, and a dark stone pillar was slowly emerging from the scar in the sky. The third scar in the sky of 9 regions suddenly descended and brought the second reverse Gisaurus pillar. This time the immortal world's target was Cloud region. The next moment the golden light rose from the ground and suddenly illuminated the sky. The light was so blazing that it was even more dazzling than the sun behind the dark clouds. For a time, even the inside of the passage between the two worlds was illuminated by it. On the surface of the stone pillar, the picture of the collapse of countless worlds was also clearly visible. This light came so suddenly that it seemed to scare the scar and the stone pillar in the sky. The stone pillar revealed its head a little and then began to slowly retreat. There was a city floating in the air. It was a magnificent city made entirely of gold, and it shone with light. Golden King stood on the tallest tower in the middle of the city, looked up at the reverse Gisaurus pillar, and showed a disdainful smile. Although he was below, he had a condescending and disdainful momentum. Reverse Gisaurus pillar? A toy of cowardly rats. It has the supreme law, but it is bound by the decaying body. This poor combination makes me feel nauseous. With that, Golden King waved his hand, and tens of thousands of golden halos lit up beside the tower, filling the sky above the golden city. The inside of the halos was like opening tens of thousands of doors through space, and behind the doors were tens of thousands of magical weapons. Each of these magical weapons was enough to make countless people scramble for them, but in the golden city, they were as common as gravel and grass. Golden King sneered and waved his hand forward. Thus, tens of thousands of magical weapons cut through the sky and hit the stone pillar in the sky. A halo of light suddenly lit up at the end of the stone pillar and spread around. In an instant, it swept away the haze and clouds in the sky, revealing a clear sky with a radius of thousands of miles. The magical weapons close to the stone pillar also wavered halfway, and then simply disintegrated and fell like a meteor shower. And this meteor shower was almost equivalent to the entire inventory of a high-rank immortal cultivation sect. However, for the Golden King this seemed to be irrelevant. Once again he raised his hand, once again opened tens of thousands of halos, summoned the same number of magical weapons, and aimed them at the stone pillar again. This time, it was too late for the reverse Gisaurus pillar to light up the light of destruction. Its fragile body was completely exposed to the attack range of the Golden King. However, at this time, an invisible big hand suddenly descended and slapped Golden City from top to bottom. The city of Golden King was already extremely magnificent, but the invisible hand seemed to be bigger than the city. Suddenly, the whole city was included in the attack range. Ha bastard! Golden King was fearless. Instead, his blood-colored eyes flashed with excitement. He didn't dodge and just let the big hand come. At the same time he quietly drew out a long sword that looked like a pillar. Rumble. Half of Yunzhou heard the muffled thunder-like sound of impact coming from the sky. The city of Golden King fell like a meteorite, and the huge palm was also fragmented and completely destroyed by the counterattack force. Without the protection of the invisible hand, the pillar of Gisaurus did not dare to forcefully descend and slowly retracted itself. Instead, 3 or 4 immortals rushed out of the passage. However, 9 regions had already taken measures to deal with it. Warriors, charge with me. The blonde and silver-armored female knight stood on the top of the mountain, holding the holy sword high. The tip of the sword pointed straight to the sky, and then a white beam of light ran through the sky. Then she shook her shoulders and a pair of wings spread out from her back. Several scales appeared on the back of her white jade-like hands. Behind the female knight was a huge army of various kinds, more than half of which had different appearance characteristics from the natives of 9 regions. This was the reinforcements from the Western continent. Among them, there were great mages who had studied alone in the ivory tower for hundreds of years and mastered the true meaning of magic. There was also the barbarian god of war who had violent blood surging in his body. There was also the master of the shadow assassin who appeared and disappeared mysteriously. Unlike the reinforcements who came to 9 regions in the early stage, the fighting power of this army was exceptionally amazing. Their lineup was even slightly better than the deity stage Red Guards. In fact, this was all the essence of the Western continent, and also the last group of survivors of the Western continent who followed the Golden King to 9 regions. The Golden King handed over this army to Aya, and under the leadership of Aya, these people fearlessly charged at the immortals in the sky. In an instant, the battle became white-hot. The miscellaneous army led by Aya instantly surrounded the immortals in the lower realm, and then the two sides were locked in a fierce battle. The cultivators who watched the battle from afar were shocked. The fighting power of this group of Western continent people was so strong, even stronger than expected. At that time, Aya said that she could restrain the fallen immortals for a moment without the help of the people of 9 regions. At that time people disagreed. But at this time, it seemed that the Night King was indeed a symbol of integrity and justice. In terms of strength, the current Aya was completely above Kuchin. When the Western continent was on the brink of extinction, she met the ancestors of the dragon race in her hometown, Bretonia. Those highly intelligent creatures entrusted all of their inheritance to her. Thus, overnight, Aya's body had the dragon blood essence of hundreds of dragons. This power was enough to make a mortal deified, and thus, the benefits that Aya obtained were even more. As long as she slowly released the potential in her body, she could advance to the highest level at a steady and amazing speed. Although the miscellaneous army was not as good at cooperation as the Red Guards, there was a magical force that constantly emerged from all over 9 regions to protect them during the battle. With this advantage, Aya was able to tie with the 3 immortals. However, this tie obviously could not last. Both sides knew that this battle was just a test. What really determined the direction of the situation was how senior immortal Xiaoyao, who was behind the passage between the 2 worlds, was going to deploy the power of the immortal world. The other was when Golden King would be able to regroup and join the battlefield. At the same time, Golden King sat on a broken throne and watched impatiently as a group of cultivators rushed forward in front of him. Not long after, a thin cultivator flew in front of Golden King and said with some trepidation, "The main structure of the city has been restored by 40%. Too slow, bastard. Double the speed for me." The cultivator was immediately dumbfounded and said, But we have reached our limit. If we speed up any more, we will lose our lifespan and even endanger our lives." "Then go to hell, bastard. Compared with my golden city, your lowly life is not worth a bit." How can you talk like that? You're being unreasonable." This cultivator who specialized in building maintenance had quite a temper, but his temper disappeared without a trace after a lightning flashed past him and flattened over a dozen mountains. "I understand, we will do our best to speed up the repair of the golden city." Seeing the submissive and obedient look of the cultivator, Golden King slightly raised the corner of his mouth, revealing a cold smile. As more and more people pledged allegiance to him, his power as the king also continued to recover. Of course, compared with the glory when he ruled the entire Western continent, it was not worth mentioning, but it was enough for him to win this war. At that moment, a few more cultivators arrived in front of him, looking furious. "Why don't you let us attack in support? Right now, your Western continent army is holding the immortals back. As long as we take advantage of the situation to attack and seal the passage between the 2 worlds, we can win this war. Why don't you give the order?" Golden King raised his head high and didn't look at these people who suddenly jumped out. "I'm talking to you. Where are you looking at?" The next moment, Golden King lowered his head and looked at these people with blood-red eyes. "You want to attack? Fine, I'll help you." Before his voice fell, several chains came from the void like lightning, entangled those people and then flung them upward. These people were tied up by the chains and could not use their cultivation base at all. They could only scream and fly into the sky and enter the battlefield between the fallen immortals and Aya. The 2 sides in the fierce battle had no time to care too much. The aftermath of their attack easily shattered these people. "Who else wants to attack? Stand up and let me see it." The tyrannical means of Golden King instantly shocked the scene, because the cultivators of 9 regions present all thought of a person who disappeared in the fragment of the passage between the 2 worlds and once ruled 9 regions for 15 years. The same irresistible, the same ruthlessness. In some ways, this supreme of Western continent was surprisingly consistent with Wang Lu. In the silence, the cultivator in charge of the maintenance of the Golden City hurriedly came and said, "The main restoration of the city has been completed, but that's enough. Now I'm going to end this boring farce." With that, Golden King raised his hand, and the whole city shone again. Although compared with the original flawless posture, it looked a bit dilapidated and declined, and there were still many details that had not yet been repaired in the part destroyed by the invisible giant hand of senior immortal Xiaoyao. However, the domineering momentum was undeniable. Tens of thousands of halos appeared around Golden King, and countless divine weapons and treasures soon set off a storm from the bottom up, helping Aya to beat the 3 immortals left and right. As for Golden City, it rose up amidst the ferocious attacks. This time the speed of the Golden City was unusually fast. In the blink of an eye, it had already crossed the battlefield between Aya and the fallen immortals. The Golden City was unstoppable in its high-speed state. Although the 3 immortals intended to stop it, on the one hand, they were restrained by Aya's army and on the other hand, they really didn't want to be crushed. And the three of them soon paid the price for their moment of hesitation. Because at that moment the city of gold suddenly sped up, dragging a huge golden afterimage behind it as it pierced through the crack in the sky. Soundlessly, the scar in the sky completely disappeared after a series of distortions. Chapter 820. The third defensive battle in the crack in the sky ended with a great victory for the 9 regions. The passage between the 2 worlds that the immortal world painstakingly opened was larger than any of the previous ones. However, it was destroyed by the extravagant self-detonation of the Golden City by Golden King. Even the reversed Gisaurus pillar in the passage was destroyed, which was a heavy loss. Golden King, who single-handedly led the victory, was naturally the biggest hero. In this battle, in order to establish his prestige, the Supreme of Western Continent deliberately did not use the fighting power of 9 regions. Except for the urgent repair of the Golden City, which was requisitioned by the craftsmen of 9 regions, the rest were all Western Continent people. Golden King used these Western Continent people as his team to create his own Golden Kingdom. In the battle, his proud power, wealth, was undoubtedly displayed, and his grasp of the opportunity was also remarkable. Whether it was luring Xiaoyao to make his move, using the divine weapon to break the immortal technique, or finally pushing the broken Golden City into the passage while the enemy was unprepared, Golden King used the simplest tactics to maximize the results. From the perspective of a bystander, it was inevitable that Golden King's skills and tactics were just SOSO, without any profound deduction and calculation. However, if one stood on the side of his opponent, one could truly understand the horror of Golden King. Because he didn't need to pay attention to any conspiracy and calculation. He could push the chess pieces to a fatal position just like taking a stroll in the courtyard. Many times Golden King's tactics seemed to be unreasonable, but he could win. In the words of the people of Jiuzhou, this was the Tao of nature and it was completely natural. However, for the victory of this battle, Golden King paid a heavy price. Ha, mere fallen immortal bastards, you're really vulnerable. I haven't even used my strength yet and you've already fallen. After destroying the passage between the 2 worlds, Golden King slowly descended from mid-air, and his wild laughter had already raged on the ground 1 step ahead of him. On the ground, the cultivators of 9 regions had already gathered and welcomed his return with extremely complicated eyes. Bastards. Well, cultivators of 9 regions, what else do you have to say now? Tremble under my invincible heroic bearing, I give you the right to look up to the glory, ha ha ha. Gil, shut up, you should really look at yourself now. Whether it was 9 regions or Western Continent, there were not many people who dared to interrupt Golden King and call him by his real name. However, Aya was undoubtedly one of them. She had just finished the battle with the Immortals. Half tired and half helpless, she shook her head at Golden King. You're clearly an arrow at the end of its flight, so why are you still holding on? Golden King disdainfully said, spent force? Night King, what nonsense are you spouting now? My condition has never been better. Is that so? Then why has your golden armor faded? What? Upon hearing this, Golden King was shocked and quickly looked down at his chest. Sure enough, the once golden armor had changed color and turned silvery white. Among the onlookers, there were also many who were puzzled. Why did Golden King's armor change color after a fight? Soon, someone who was familiar with the history of the Western Continent answered in a low voice, the armor of the Golden King is a symbol of his wealth. He used wealth to protect his body. The more treasures he has, the stronger the defense of the armor. Just now, he lost the Golden City, so his wealth has greatly shrunk, so the Golden King has become the Silver King? The cultivator who was familiar with the history couldn't help but shake his head. After all, he did it for the sake of our 9 regions. The armor of the Golden King, which can make the endless wealth of the Golden King fade, I'm afraid the loss of his attack just now could bankrupt the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League. Just now, Golden King scattered thousands of divine weapons like sand, but it still couldn't shake the color of the armor. However, when the Golden City was lost, the armor inside transformed into the Silver King. His loss could be imagined. No, impossible, this is absolutely impossible. Golden King looked down at the silver armor, and his blood-colored eyes revealed a stubbornness that absolutely refused to admit the reality. Yes, I understand. It must be because of this battle that my wealth has been sublimated, so the armor has been upgraded to platinum quality. Yes, from today on I will change my name to Platinum King. Bastards, listen up, you. Before he could finish his words, Aya's figure flashed and instantly appeared behind Golden King. The hilt of the holy sword in her hand slammed against the back of his head, and the invincible Golden King fell down without saying a word. While this battle is over. Whether it's the immortal world or 9 regions, both need a little time to regroup, and Gil also needs time to rest. However, he has fully proved his strength as promised, so I hope you guys can take care of yourselves. When Golden King opened his eyes again, he found himself in a strange room. The decoration around him was exquisite and gorgeous. Although it was still a bit shabby by the standard of Golden King, it was barely acceptable. "You're awake?" The cold voice of a woman belonged to the woman he loved and hated. Aya stood at the door of the room, dressed in a military uniform, and there was no tenderness in her eyes. "Night King, where is this?" Area 51 of the Savage Land, the temporary residence of Wang Lu. "Tsk, no wonder there's that kid stench." Golden King narrowed his eyes in dissatisfaction. "What's the situation now?" "Both sides are still preparing for the war. There's nothing important worth mentioning, except your injury." Golden King immediately curled his lips and said, "What a joke, how could I have any injury?" "When you're trying to be brave, can you lower your head a little and look at your chest?" Bronze King. Golden King immediately shut up and didn't speak. In fact, there was no need to lower his head. Out of the corner of his eyes, he had already caught a glimpse of his chest, which was red brass color. As the Night King said, his injury was even more serious. "Golden City is where your foundation lies. How clueless must you be to blow up the place that you've built your life on?" Golden King was silent for a while and then said with a smile, "Night King, this is where your tolerance as a king is lacking. You think that the reason why a king is that he has territory, subjects, and wealth. But in fact this is not true. Whether there is a king or not, territory, subjects, and wealth will always exist. So why do I have these things instead of others? It's very simple, because I am the unique king in the world, so I can have everything. And now, even if I lose the Golden City, as long as I am still a king, I am destined to have endless wealth. Whether it's the Golden City or the king's wealth, they all exist because of me." Upon hearing this, Aya didn't speak for a long time. Both of them were kings, but their way of the king was obviously very different, so there was no possibility of communication between them. "Are you really sure that you can recover from your injury?" Golden King was silent and just stared straight at Aya. At this moment, his armor changed from bronze to bright silver, and then gradually turned golden. Don't forget who inspired the construction of the group of immortal tombs in 9 regions. The people of 9 regions can create something out of nothing by relying on a Fujisaurus, so how could I not do it? Aya nodded. "That's good. The next battle will still be led by you, I won't bother you anymore." "Wait a minute. What about that kid Wang Lu? Or is he hiding and refusing to show up?" Aya stopped. "You will definitely come back. That's the best. Don't forget, according to our bet, there will be a fight between me and him." Aya didn't say a word. She just spread the dragon wings behind her and flew away. After Aya left, cold sweat flowed down from Golden King's forehead. The color of his armor suddenly returned to its bronze color and even became darker. "Damn it, do I have to degenerate into the Black Iron King?" At the same time, on the stellar peak of Spirit Sword Mountain, Fengyin Taoist Master looked a bit restless in the bamboo room. With the help of the Kunlun mirror, he saw countless lines of cause and effect, which seemed to contain mystery, but upon closer inspection, it was chaotic. He tried to use the stellar star divination technique to deduce the clues, but it was always to no avail. Of course, this was not unusual. At this time, Fengyin was still in peak deity stage, although with the help of outside path method, his real strength was not weaker than most Dixian, but even so, in the immortal level battlefield, it still seemed insignificant. Therefore, whether it was deduction or stellar divine eyes, they would inevitably be strongly interfered and lose their effectiveness. "Senior brother sect leader, what's the situation?" Outside the bamboo room, second junior brother Lu Xian, third junior brother Fang He and the others came in with a sad face. "Is there still no news about little Wang Lu?" A woman in a gorgeous dress asked softly. With Wang Lu's current status, the only one who could call him little Wang Lu was probably Hua Yun. "It still doesn't work. I've tried many methods, but it still doesn't work. Even the life seal on the Spirit Pool Peak is frozen. I can't see him alive or dead." The life seal of the Spirit Pool Peak was a new technology developed by the 9 regions after inheriting the legacy of Dixian. It established a strong bond between the cultivator and the sect. No matter what happened to the cultivator, it would be immediately reflected in the life seal. This kind of immortal method that ignored space distance was well received by the major sections. However, when it came to Wang Lu, the life seal lost its effect. Wang Lu is outside 9 regions, so it's normal for the immortal method to fail, but now people's hearts are wavering. If he still can't show up. Didn't Supreme Hichu and the others hear him before? It's even worse. He stopped Senior Immortal Xiaoyao, and now someone is framing him for colluding with the immortal world. He was also the one who handled the previous interrogation of Kanglin. Wang Lu is too confident in his work. When he is present, everything is fine. However, once the situation is out of control, he will inevitably suffer a backlash. If he is cautious in doing things, I'm afraid he has achieved nothing in the past 15 years. Alright, stop arguing. Feng Yin Taoist master's words stopped the dispute in the bamboo room. The eyes of the junior brothers and sisters gathered, waiting for Feng Yin's decision. Let's go to the Sword Tomb. Sword Tomb? It's time for Old Ten to come out of the mountain. Now, if we want to find Wang Lu, we have to find him. Chapter 821. The Sword Tomb of Spirit Sword Mountain had not been opened for many, many years. This lonely mountain was like an illusion that did not exist, looming in the midst of the mountains. In the past 100 years, whether it was the disciples of the Spirit Sword sect or the elders of the Heavenly Sword Hall, they rarely entered the Sword Tomb. However, there were many legends about the Sword Tomb, especially among the outer sect disciples. For example, when a disciple was flying in the mountains, he accidentally went the wrong way and mistakenly entered the Sword Tomb. Then he saw a white-haired ghost on a lifeless land. The white-haired ghost had a vague outline of a human, but the deathly aura around it was so heavy that the Shudan stage disciple immediately fainted on the ground. When he woke up, he was already on the Carefree Peak. Although there were no scars on his body, his brain seemed to be missing a piece. He could only vaguely remember what had happened before, but the process was vague. And when he found Hua Yun and asked about this matter, he was immediately locked up in a small dark room for a month on the grounds that he had violated the sect's rules and trespassed into the forbidden area. However, the legend of the white-haired ghost gradually spread, and people began to discuss the identity of the white-haired ghost. Some people said that he was the former sect leader who had been imprisoned by the elders of the Heavenly Sword Hall. This matter was related to the secret of the coup, and anyone who rashly inquired about it would be silenced. Some people said that this was the amalgamation of the remnant souls of the 10,000 swords in the sword catacomb. Every day they would disperse at sunrise, and at night, they would gather in spirits to form again. Of course, the mainstream view was that this person was the 10th elder of the Heavenly Sword Hall, who had existed in name for more than 100 years but had never appeared in person. The legend of the 10 elders of Lingjian School, together with the new dishes in the Misty Peak cafeteria, the white-haired ghost in the Sword Tomb, and the lost moral integrity in the Non-Phase Peak, were known as one of the top 10 unimaginable events in Lingjian School. Some of the more senior cultivators had carefully calculated the possible identity of this 10th elder. For example, if he was ranked 10th, then he should be after Hua Yun. But according to historical records, Hua Yun was basically the youngest cultivator of that generation, so much so that she didn't even participate in the management trainee program. After that, those who entered the mountain would be classified as the next generation of disciples and would not enter the ranks of the Heavenly Sword Hall. So where did this 10th elder come from? Some people said that the 10th patriarch was just a fictional character. The meaning of his existence was that he could reasonably withdraw some money from Lu Li, the 6th patriarch, and use it as his personal treasury. However, to painstakingly fabricate such an identity just to obtain funds from the sect, this was too absurd. Some people said that the position of the 10th elder was empty, and that the most outstanding person from the next generation of disciples would be chosen to replace him. However, this explanation fell apart after Wang Lu's reputation rose. Wang Lu's authority in the sect was already strong enough, but he did not become an elder of Heavenly Sword Hall and still acted as a disciple. The legend of the Sword Tomb and the 10th elder was so popular that when the elders of the Heavenly Sword Hall appeared outside the Sword Tomb, the onlooking disciples had already surrounded them in 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside, and then excitedly discussed them loudly. The sect leader is going to the Sword Catacomb to collect the demons. The Lingjian School's finances have collapsed. Are they going to sell their belongings in the Sword Catacomb? 5th Martial Uncle hid in the Sword Catacomb after getting into trouble? Is this a new encirclement launched by the Heavenly Sword Hall? Listening to the boiling noise, Fang He's face was livid and his whole body was tense and trembling. Lu Xian hurriedly consoled him from the side, forcing him to restrain himself. However, as an impartial disciplinary elder, he definitely had to record these audacious brats and settle the score in the future. Feng Yin himself sighed and said, "There's no need to be angry with these children. To be able to laugh carefreely at this time, their temperament is admirable, isn't it?" In the face of the crisis of the fallen immortal, most of the cultivators were gloomy. Even though the Golden King had just won a big victory not long ago, it still could not change the overall situation. It was a wonder that the disciples of the Lingjian school were alive and kicking. However, what happened next was not suitable for onlookers. After dispersing these busybodies, Feng Yin, with a trace of exhaustion, chanted a spell and opened the seal outside the sword catacomb. Since the disciple mistakenly entered this place decades ago, there was this threshold. The seal of the sword catacomb burst open with a twisted and sharp sound. Feng Yin was a little puzzled and said, "Hey, this seal seems to be a little different?" Lu Xian said, "After being influenced by the death aura in the sword catacomb for so many years, it's not surprising that there are some changes. Let's go in first." When the group entered the sword catacomb, they soon felt that the surrounding had cooled down. It was still a hot summer outside the Spirit Sword Mountain, but inside the sword catacomb, it was like late autumn. This was the place where the Lingjian school buried their swords for thousands of years. The dead swords naturally gathered the yin energy of heaven and earth, and over the years, it had become quite a climate. However, compared to the last time, it seems to have eased a lot. Zhou Ming nodded and said, "Yes, although the yin energy is heavy, the deathly stillness has subsided a lot." Hua Yun asked, "Could it be that senior brother Zhang Sheng has untied the knot in his heart in the past few years?" The others looked at each other and then shook their heads helplessly. What was the knot in Zhang Sheng's heart? Only these old people knew. It was a strong obsession that could turn the yin energy in the sword catacomb into the death aura. With his temper, how could it be easy for him to get out of the shadow and untie the knot in his heart? Actually, senior brother Zhang Sheng is really something. It's obviously not his fault. Hua Yun pouted her mouth, somewhat disapproving. There are some things that you don't know. Zhang Sheng doesn't just blame himself. Recalling the past, the several elders were full of sadness. The most important reason why Zhang Sheng could not extricate himself from his heart demon was actually that woman. Trapped by love, no one could do anything about it. After the catastrophe, everyone returned to the Spirit Sword Mountain with a broken lineup. Zhang Sheng then sealed himself in the sword catacomb, claiming that his sin was unforgivable and that he was ashamed to see anyone. But in fact, who really blamed him? It was just that it didn't make sense. Later, when the Heavenly Sword Hall was reorganized, Feng Yin invited Zhang Sheng to come out of the mountain. He only promised that in the critical moment of Lingjian school, he would come out to help. However, when the ranking was arranged, he strongly requested to be ranked at the end. In a sense, Zhang Sheng was really a very awkward person. However, looking at the aura around him, maybe he has really thought it through? With doubts, the several people continued to go deeper into the sword catacomb. Not long after, they saw a hut. At the door, a white-haired cultivator looked at them with a smile, and then cupped his hands in salute. "Greetings, senior brothers and senior sisters." Feng Yin and the others were somewhat in disbelief. After gawking for a moment, they exclaimed, "Zhang Sheng, is that really you?" The person in front of them was like a different person compared to the person who came to visit decades ago. At that time, Zhang Sheng was depressed for a long time, and his handsome face was distorted, not like a human shape. At that time, his disciple said that the white-haired ghost was not a joke. However, at this time, Zhang Sheng, except for his white hair, his handsome face was the same as it was more than 100 years ago. Where was the slightest bit of depression? Instead, he looked much younger than Feng Yin, Lu Xian, and other overworked people. So, did he really untie the knot in his heart during the period of isolation in the sword catacomb? This was really overjoyed. However, before they could further exchange pleasantries with Zhang Sheng, they saw Zhang Sheng nodding to his side. "Come, Lu, greet my senior brothers and senior sisters." When they heard this, they were startled again. Where was the person beside Zhang Sheng? "Senior brothers, senior sisters, this is Lu, my beloved Taoist companion. I wonder if you still recognize her?" Feng Yin and the others were just dumbfounded, not knowing how to respond. Of course, they had an impression of the poison-extracting physician. Even after 200 years, it was still fresh in their memory, but the Lu that they recognized was not an invisible person. I'm confused." Zhang Sheng smiled and shook his head. "I forgot that you can't see her." "Can't see?" Feng Yin became more and more puzzled. He scanned the surroundings with his stellar divine eyes, but he did not see the existence of any invisible things. Zhang Sheng patted his chest. "My wife has always lived in my heart." "What?" "Well, how should I say it?" Zhang Sheng looked up, somewhat embarrassed. "In words that you can understand, my wife now only exists in my imagination. It is my imagination that gives her life. Don't look at me like that, I am not possessed by the devil. You don't need to pity me because I have already obtained what I have always dreamed of." In my opinion, she is right in front of me. Every frown and every smile is the same as her at that time. To be able to obtain her is the greatest happiness in my life." Then he stretched out his arm and gently hugged a mass of air. Hua Yun was tongue-tied, but other people. Zhang Xing looked at the air in his arms with pity and love and said, "Well, except for me, there is no third person in the world who can see her, but why do I need other people's opinions? The life of me and her, as long as the two of us are satisfied, it is enough." Perhaps this was not the first time that Zhang Xing had said these words. He spoke so fluently that people could not refute it. Of course, Feng Yin and the others would not refute it. To be able to get out of the knot in his heart was really more important than anything else, even if it was self-deception. They really did not want to see his miserable appearance that was worse than a ghost. But at this moment, Zhou Ming suddenly remembered something and asked, "Zhang Xing, did you come up with this idea yourself?" Zhang Xing heard this and said with a smile, "Senior brother knows me. I am a stubborn bull, how could I come up with such a wonderful idea? Moreover, I was too sad at that time and my longing for Lu was also distorted. In fact, I could not restore her original appearance. Someone helped me to get rid of it." "Someone helped you?" Everyone was surprised. No one had entered or left the sword tomb for decades. "Who quietly sneaked into the sword tomb and helped him come up with this idea?" Feng Yin said. "Thinking about it carefully, there can't be anyone else, right? Is it Wang Lu?" Zhang Sheng was slightly surprised. "Wang Lu? Who is that?" "Wait a minute, you don't know Wang Lu? Should I know him?" Zhang Sheng was also curious and then asked the air next to him, "Is he your acquaintance?" "Isn't he?" Turning back, Zhang Sheng said, "In short, it was fifth senior sister who helped us husband and wife. How is that possible?" Chapter 822. The episode about Zhang Sheng's wife was soon turned over. After all, Feng Yin and the others didn't come to the sword tomb to solve the problem of love. "There's something I want to ask of you. We need you to use the dead sword here to find a person." Zhang Sheng was startled. "Use the dead sword to find someone? Could it be that there's news about the missing predecessor of our sect?" In the sword tomb of Spirit Sword Sect, not only were there the immortal swords that had been destroyed in the past thousands of years, but there were also a considerable number of missing swords buried. Although these immortal swords were not damaged, the sword spirit had fallen into self-isolation because of the departure of the master, making it unusable. Lingjian School placed these swords in the sword tomb, not only to commemorate the sword owner, but also to have a glimmer of hope to find the original person. Lingjian School used the sword to cultivate, and there was a strange connection between the cultivators and the sword. As long as the person was still alive, then there was a hope to find the person. Of course, this hope was only limited to hope. In the thousands of years of the existence of the sword tomb, there were less than 10 cultivators who were found in this way. Therefore, when he heard that Feng Yin and the others wanted to use the dead sword to find someone, Zhang Xing was also surprised. "It's not a predecessor, it's a..." Feng Yin pondered and looked around. He saw that his junior brothers and sisters were more and more puzzled, thinking that it was time for the secret to be unraveled. "It's a person that you and I both know. I want you to help me find the big brother." "What?" As soon as these words came out, the whole hall was shocked. Feng Yin, one of the 10 elders of Heavenly Sword Hall, was the leader. In the past 200 years he had worked hard to make Lingjian School rise. The current big brother was none other than him. However, this time Feng Yin actually said the word big brother. Then, to be Feng Yin's big brother, there was only one person in the world who was qualified. However, that person had already died 200 years ago. Moreover, what was the relationship between the big brother and the two people who were now missing? If you find him, you can find those two people. Feng Yin didn't explain too much. "Can you do it?" Zhang Xing thought for a moment. "The relic of the big brother is indeed in the sword tomb, but I'm not sure if I can find him. Since you've come all the way here, it's obvious that you've already used all the normal methods." Feng Yin said, "I'll try my best. I believe eldest brother will respond." "Alright, I'll give it a try." Behind the thatched cottage was an expanse of white wilderness. The uneven hills were suffused with boundless deathly silent sword insight, and the wilderness was devoid of plants, insects, and vitality. Even Feng Yin's group felt slightly uncomfortable when they arrived here. However, Zhang Xing was skillful and at ease here. He had been in seclusion here for 200 years, and his body and mind had long been inseparable from this deathly still sword intent. Coming here was like a fish in water. His white hair fluttered in the wind in the wilderness, causing his entire person to have an ethereal and otherworldly temperament. Even with his stellar divine eyes, Feng Yin could not see through Zhang Sheng at this time. He could only roughly judge that his strength was not inferior to anyone in the Heavenly Sword Hall. Unexpectedly, after 200 years of seclusion in the Sword Tomb, junior brother is one step ahead of us on the immortal path. Zhang Sheng said with a smile, if it weren't for fifth senior sister's timely reminder, I'm afraid I would have already turned into a handful of white sand in this wilderness. How could I have the opportunity to achieve enlightenment? Speaking of which, it's still fifth senior sister who is amazing, worthy of inheriting eldest brother's mantle. Okay, we're here. While talking, the group came to a small hill. Zhang Sheng stood at the forefront and sighed softly, eldest brother's relics are all here. Senior brother Feng Yin, are you sure eldest brother is still here? Feng Yin nodded. At this time Lu Xian and the others had also vaguely guessed the truth. All of them were nervous and had mixed feelings, unable to say a word. Zhang Sheng walked up the hill, and as he walked he said to the air next to him, Lu, I'll leave it to you later. Just do as I taught you. Hua Yun was startled when she heard this. You still need the help of a non-existent person for such an important matter? However, just as she was about to say something, she was stopped by Feng Yin. Just wait and see. Zhang Sheng quickly stood on the top of the hill, and then his true qi began to move slowly. From stillness to movement in an instant, it set off stormy waves. The power that pervaded the wilderness was swept by Zhang Sheng, as if it was being torn apart by a strong force. A whirlpool of death energy quickly condensed into a substance in the shape of a funnel, spinning down to Zhang Sheng's feet. Lu, help me filter it a little. Yes. At this moment, Feng Yin and the others clearly heard a gentle woman's voice. The next moment they saw that on the hill in front of Zhang Sheng, a slender woman, under the surging death energy, condensed into a substance little by little. That's right, it was the poison-extracting physician that Zhang Sheng yearned for day and night, the fuse that destroyed everything. However, Feng Yin and the others had no time to think about why a character that was imagined out of thin air would suddenly exist. Because with the appearance of Lu, the violent death energy became a little docile, and after gathering a large amount of death energy, the hill under Zhang Sheng's feet began to tremble violently. Bang! With an earth-shattering sound, the hill completely collapsed. Several balls of white light rushed straight to the sky, and then slowly descended until they quietly floated in front of them. A broken sword, half a robe, a hairpin and 2 broken books. Zhang Sheng wearily descended with the balls of light, and Lu, who was beside him, had become invisible again. These are the relics of eldest senior brother. Originally they were just a pile of powder, but they were temporarily activated by the death energy I gathered in the Sword Tomb. They recovered a bit of their original shape and turned into a touch of spirituality. Next, they should be driven by instinct to find the traces of their master. But, let me confirm again, is eldest senior brother really still here? Feng Yin was silent for a long time. The relationship between eldest senior brother Ouyang Shang and Wang Lu was not something that could be explained in a few words. Whether eldest senior brother was still here or not, he was not completely sure. But, apart from that, what else could he do? Eldest senior brother is still here, he will definitely respond to the call. Good. Zhang Sheng nodded his head and reached out to touch the relics. In an instant, those balls of white light began to twist and expand crazily, like wild beasts that had yet to transform, surging with fluctuations that caused one's heart to palpitate. This is, Zhang Sheng said, waking up these guys who have been resting in peace for 200 years and telling them that their master is still alive, they will inevitably be agitated. Of course, this is a good thing because when they are excited they will work harder to call. However, the side effect is that if they find out that their master is not here, they may think that we are making fun of them. These guys, who have gathered most of the death energy in the Sword Tomb, are very powerful. When Feng Yin heard this, his complexion slightly changed, but he quickly calmed down. Don't worry, eldest senior brother will not let us down. Zhang Sheng smiled and said, he has indeed never let us down. Along with the conversation between the two, Ouyang Shang's broken relics twisted more violently, and ripples visible to the naked eye began to spread and erupt wantonly. The violent power was shocking. Oh, it seems that these guys' patience is not very good. It's only been a while, but they already feel impatient and restless. Zhang Sheng said this, but his expression gradually became gloomy. He put one hand in front of him and the other hand hugged a mass of air, clearly in a defensive posture. Senior brother Feng Yin, if the worst happens later, don't take it lightly. I know you are very powerful now, but these are the relics of eldest senior brother. Before he finished speaking, there was another bang in the wilderness. A hill in the distance exploded and a few white lights floated in the air. Zhang Sheng's eyes widened in disbelief. This, bang, bang, bang. One after another, the hills in the wilderness collapsed, and more relics of the deceased were aroused. Resuscitation from the deep sleep of the earth. The white lights connected into a river of stars, and countless relics of the deceased began to clamor along with the relics of Ouyang Shang. Zhang Sheng slightly revealed a wry smile. This is bad, I seem to have underestimated the appeal of eldest senior brother. That guy has begun to summon the entire sword tomb to rebel. And not only the relics of our golden generation cultivators, but even the relics of our ancestors have begun to respond to him. Really, eldest senior brother didn't have such a bad temper in the past. Where did these dead things learn to stir up trouble? After a pause, Zhang Xing asked, Senior brother, I haven't been out of the sword tomb in the past few years. May I ask, is the mountain protection array of Lingjian School still strong? If it breaks out later, its power should be several times greater than the 49 heavenly tribulations. Can it be blocked? Feng Yin did not answer, but from his solemn look, it was not difficult to see that even if it could be blocked, it would not be easy. Lu Li, who was usually responsible for maintaining the array, was sweating profusely and asked softly, Senior brother, should we call Ling Er and the others? Before his voice died away, Ouyang Shang's broken sword suddenly flew high, and the half of the broken sword body was restored bit by bit under the light. Then, a violent wave went straight up to the sky along the sword body, and the cloud and mist array of Lingjian School was broken in an instant. The aftermath did not stop, sweeping away a large area of clouds in the Blue River region. That was the strongest sound that this sword could make. After an unknown amount of time, it seemed very long, but it also seemed like only a moment. The flying sword trembled and red blood oozed out of the clear sword body, like the blood tears of a desperate person. However, bathed in the blood tears, the flying sword was scarlet, and the sword tip slowly turned downward. The cold light reflected in the eyes of Feng Yin and the others. This guy seems to be really angry with us. Zhang Xing hugged the person in his arms even tighter. Senior brother Feng Yin, this time, you seem to have bet wrongly. Feng Yin and the others had already formed a formation, waiting for the flying sword in the air to explode. However, the next moment, from the endless distant sky, a lightning fell obliquely and hit the blood-colored flying sword. Then a familiar yet strange voice surged in everyone's ears. You idiot, what the hell are you doing? Chapter 823. As soon as the voice of Wang Lu arrived, the blood-colored flying sword immediately stopped and then trembled even more violently, but it was no longer violent. The blood-colored sword also quickly dissipated and was replaced by a dazzling and translucent brilliance, as if it was brimming with tears. Alright, it's just 200 years of not seeing each other, why are you acting like a spoiled child? I know you guys have had a hard time all these years. Don't worry, we will see each other soon. With the words of Wang Lu, the dead treasures finally quieted down. After losing their noisy spirit, the white light quickly extinguished, and the treasures returned to the earth to rest in peace. Feng Yin and the others were already very excited. Senior brother, is that you? The voice in the sky was silent for a while. Actually, I don't want to talk to you in this capacity. After all, it has been many years. But since you guys have found me, I'd like to say hello to you guys. The next moment, the greetings from the junior brothers and sisters were intertwined. Okay, let's not talk nonsense. Time is limited, so I'll give a brief account of the situation. Wang Wu and I are still trapped in the fragment of the passage between the two worlds, which is not connected to the 9 regions. Now, it is by relying on the call of the Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman and the Sword Tomb that we barely opened a crack in the space barrier. But now this crack can only be used for communication, not passage. I need you to build a tower on the Spirit Sword Mountain, a tower to the sky, to open a way for the two of us to return. How to build it? Give full play to the subjective initiative, build it as fast as possible. How do I know how to build it? I've already told you the requirements, now it's your turn to come up with a plan. Understood, what else? I want to know the current situation of the 9 regions. Lu Li, you tell me. Among the elders of Heavenly Sword Hall, Lu Li was the most eloquent. After pondering for a moment, he selected the important events of the 9 regions. You can fully trust the ability of the Golden King, but never trust his position. His goal is not in the 9 regions, so it's very possible for him to do anything. So I think you should understand who you should support now. Aya? You can trust Aya unconditionally, but Aya has more power than flexibility, so I want you to go to Area 51, open the secret door under the Seat of Fire, enter the underground city, take out the Tinder token on the 5th floor, and then give it to the nine-tailed fox. Luli was shocked. The Tinder token, that's the highest seal of Zaku in Area 51, and you want to give it to the nine-tailed fox? If you don't trust the nine-tailed, do you want to give it? As soon as this remark came out, several Heavenly Sword Hall elders had different expressions. Feng Yin was obviously overjoyed while the others were hesitant. Lu Xian probed, "Of course we trust Feng Ling, but hasn't Feng Ling already been taken by the nine-tailed celestial fox? After all, she has only existed for a short period of time. It is impossible for her to maintain her consciousness." And Lian said, "And as and a month he has this. Moreover, the nine-tailed fox is the most suitable candidate now. Foxes are the most cunning creatures in the world and you need to use her cunning. Don't forget that when the Gisaurus pillar erupted in the southern heaven region, if she didn't suppress Zhan Zai and the others, that group of people would all die under the destructive light of the Gisaurus pillar. Her understanding of the immortal world and her intuition of crisis are far better than us, the immortal cultivators." Understood. In addition, let Yin Shen make his move. If the foreshadowing is hidden for too long, it will be ineffective. Are they going to use their power? But it's a matter of life and death, don't be so sentimental. Yes. Finally, help me thank Golden King, thank him for defending the Cloud region. There are still some memorable things in that place. After saying this, the connection between Spirit Sword Mountain and the two worlds was completely cut off. Oh, there are some memorable things in the Cloud region? In the passage, Wang Wu's smile was quite strange. Help me thank Golden King? How come I didn't see that you're such an infatuated person? How many years have passed since the incident in the Grand Cloud Mountain, but you still can't forget her? Wang Lu laughed. The Grand Cloud Fairy is graceful and has the bearing of a celestial being. As long as it's a normal man, he would never forget her peerless appearance. It would be strange if I forget. As for whether I'm an infatuated person or not, other people might not know, but don't you know? With that, he leaned forward and gently kissed Wang Wu's lips. His action was light and swift, and he didn't give Wang Wu the chance to react. However, it seemed that Wang Wu did not intend to have any reaction to this scene. She licked her lips and sighed deeply. Speaking of which, it's really hard for you. Such an infatuated person, but now you can only live a boring life with me, an old woman. It must be very hard for you to hold it in. Wang Lu said, "What are you talking about? Being with you, even if it's 1,000 years or 10,000 years, it won't be hard." Really? It doesn't matter even if you can't see your other confidants? For example, the Sword Saint of Western Continent who has a relationship with you, or Lu Li, that infatuated girl? Or the beautiful daughter of the Grand Cloud Fairy? Wang Lu shrugged. "I'm not going to live here for a lifetime. Sooner or later I'll go back. Well, let's not talk about those unhappy things. Let's do today's homework again." Wang Wu let out a sigh. "You do it yourself. I'm not in the mood. I seek." Wang Lu was obviously a little disappointed, but he didn't force her. "Well, you take your time to adjust your breath. I'll adjust the giant divine weapon." After Wang Lu disappeared in the darkness of the passage, Wang Wu finally showed a trace of sadness. Wang Lu's state was getting worse and worse. The conversation just now was, of course, not Wang Lu's own style. He was deliberately imitating the original owner of the giant divine weapon, Sun Buping. In order to improve the synchronization rate, Wang Lu had exhausted all means. In the past 15 years, with the cooperation of Tetragon, he had almost experienced all the things that Sun Buping could experience in his life. But the synchronization rate was still stuck at around 70%, and it was difficult for him to make any further breakthroughs. Then, when he was trapped in the passage between the two worlds, Wang Lu reorganized his thoughts and found that he still had a small blind spot. Sun Buping used to be a passionate man. Before he met Tetragon, he had many confidants such as Shen Mo. During that time, thanks to the guidance of one of the women, their relationship was subtle but harmonious, and Sun Buping enjoyed the bliss of having multiple partners. That experience was just a minor interlude in Sun Buping's long life. But in retrospect, Wang Lu felt that such an interlude in any man's life would undoubtedly be the finishing touch. When she partnered with Tetragon earlier, she seemed to have avoided that experience intentionally or unintentionally. It was probably because of the bottleneck in the synchronization rate. Therefore, Wang Lu could only force himself to be as passionate as Sun Buping in the past, in order to try to break through the bottleneck and improve the synchronization rate. As for the results, there were indeed some results. In just a few days, Wang Lu's synchronization rate had increased by 3%, which showed that it was indeed something that he had been lacking in the past. However, this kind of rebellious change was undoubtedly a great burden for Wang Lu. It was true that Wang Lu was not a Lu Xiaohui whose heart was as still as water. Of course, he also had needs for women, but he would never learn the methods of those playboys. Especially the seemingly romantic dialogue just now, in his words, it gave him so many goosebumps that he could produce dust explosions. It would not be hard for 1,000 years or even 10,000 years. This kind of words, normally Wang Lu would never say even if a sword was placed on his neck. But now, it was as natural as eating and drinking. Wang Wu could hardly imagine how distorted his non-phase immortal heart had become at this time. If this went on, even if the synchronization rate was improved, perhaps he himself would become mentally ill. In addition, Wang Lu was now trying to imitate Sun Buping's passion. But there were only two people in the passage between the two worlds. How could there be a space for passion? Wang Lu had thousands of feelings, but he could only focus on one person. All the beautiful thoughts in his heart for those confidants had to fall on Wang Wu. To be honest, she was a bit overwhelmed. Even though non-phase method had tens of thousands of marvelous and extraordinary things, it could not compete with the giant divine weapon in patience. Not to mention that every time they competed, there would be more things in her body. And the more things there were, the more she felt uncomfortable. With a sigh, Wang Wu swept away the distracting thoughts in her mind, sat cross-legged, and silently used the internal vision method. Before long, she saw a river of stars moving inside her body. What a mess. The program that has just been compiled is going to be scrapped again. Damn it, how many versions of non-phase method is this? 300, 400? The number of times I overturned the structure in these few days on non-phase peak in more than 100 years. It's so annoying. Well, what are you talking about? Annoying? Wang Wu looked up and saw that Wang Lu had come to her side with a concerned look on his face. Wang Wu suddenly became angry and pointed her finger at her belly. What else could it be? Isn't it all because of you? Wang Lu said with a smile, Yin and Yang transformation, this is not inferior to the supreme law of the light of collapse. When it comes to the efficiency of creating something from nothing, it is far better than the self-generating speed of your king pill cultivator. A slightly bigger belly can make your strength soar. What else are you dissatisfied with? Damn, that's easy for you to say. Yin and Yang transformation, isn't it me who is responsible for taking care of it? Give full play to your maternal brilliance. My brilliance is all over your face. Your whole family is full of maternal brilliance. The more Wang Wu said, the angrier she became. However, the next moment, Wang Lu's figure flashed and suddenly appeared behind her. Then, his two arms gently hugged her. Don't be angry. What's the problem? Let's study it together. You still can't build the new non-phase method framework? Let me see your design. Is there a problem with the framework? Hearing these gentle words, the anger in Wang Wu's heart subsided a little bit. Although she knew that this gentleness was just a pretense from Wang Lu to imitate Sun Buping, in a sense, she did enjoy this gentleness. Okay, I'll leave the rest to you. I'm going to rest. Wang Lu was surprised. Hello. However, looking at the irresponsible figure of Wang Wu lying down to rest, a smile gradually appeared on Wang Lu's face. Because this scene was simply the best portrayal of the word family. A gentle husband, a grumpy wife, and the future in the belly of the wife. The next moment, his smile froze and was followed by a greater surprise. Because just when he thought of family, something seemed to bloom in his mind, and the synchronization rate of the giant divine weapon suddenly increased by a notch. Close to 80%. So that's how it is. In his whole life, Sun Buping has always been secretly looking forward to a family. Chapter 824. Sky Tower? Apart from these three words, did Wang Lu leave any other clues? In the 10,000 Arts sect, an old cultivator with thick glasses slapped the table with dissatisfaction. What does Wang Lu think of our 10,000 Arts sect? Universal wishing machine? He could get whatever he wanted. Did he even respect the academic spirit? Did he even know anything about architectural design? It's too whimsical of him to think that he can break the space barrier that encompasses the 9 regions with a single tower. In front of the old man, Elder Lu Li from the Heavenly Sword Hall of Lingjian School smiled and said, What Taoist Shifang said is indeed reasonable. In the history of 9 regions, there has never been a building that can break the space barrier of 9 regions. However, this is only limited to history. Fellow Taoist, don't forget that not long ago, there was a building that successfully broke the space barrier. Upon hearing this, Elder Shifang was startled. Reverse Gisaurus pillar? It's exactly the reverse Gisaurus pillar. If it weren't for the collapse halo of the reverse Gisaurus pillar that weakened the space barrier of 9 regions, I'm afraid we wouldn't be able to hear the voice of Wang Lu. Elder Shifang could not help but nod. Yes, the reverse Gisaurus pillar is indeed a blind spot of mine. If there is a reverse Gisaurus pillar, perhaps we can break the space barrier and bring Wang Lu back. But the reverse Gisaurus pillar is a treasure of the immortal world. Whether it's the manufacturing method or the principle of operation, we don't know much about it, so it's impossible to imitate it. The so-called not very clear is only limited to the past. Elder Shifang, can you recognize this thing? Lu Li said and cautiously took out a transparent glass bottle from his mustard seed bag, which was piled with a layer of dark powder. The powder was unremarkable, but with just a glance, Elder Shifang was so shocked that he took a few steps back and was stunned. Could this black powder be the debris of the reverse Gisaurus pillar? Lu Li said. Before Supreme Kuchin died, he used the Extinguish Immortal Sword to cut the reverse Gisaurus pillar. This is a layer of debris left on the sword, which was fortunately recovered by Supreme Hichu. I think with the research ability of 10,000 Arts Sect, with the help of these materials, we should be able to gain something. Elder Shifang reached out his trembling hand to the glass bottle and said, "This must be a monument in the history of 9 regions." After a moment of silence, Lu Li handed over half of the bottle and said, "The future of the 9 prefectures is in our hands." Ah? Shifang didn't quite understand Lu Li's you and me. He tried to take the glass bottle, only to find it stuck to Lu Li's hand. "You don't think that I want to put all the hope of 9 regions on you alone, do you?" Shifang was a little unhappy. "You don't trust me?" "I don't trust anyone on this matter. You can either do it or forget about it. Make your choice." As the leading research master of 10,000 Arts Sect, when had Taoist Master Shifang ever suffered such anger? However, looking at the black powder in the glass bottle in his hand, no matter how big his anger was, it disappeared. "All right if you insist on coming, but if you can't keep up with the pace, don't expect us to slow down and wait for you. You can try and shake me off with all your strength," Lu Li sneered in disdain. In the following period of time, as Lu Li said, Taoist Master Shifang formed his own research team and then tried to shake Lu Li off with all his strength. None of the content of the research was concealed from him. Lu Li could read every report at will, and every laboratory was completely open to him. However, 10,000 Arts Sect didn't expect him to understand it at all. As the top academic research in 9 regions, they were confident that there was a qualitative gap between them and any other sect. According to the conclusion of Supreme Tianluan, even Xingjing sect, which had unlimited financial resources and manpower, had a generation gap with 10,000 Arts Sect in terms of academic research ability. As for Lingjian School, which had withered and was once short of materials, what qualification did it have to participate in this kind of top-notch research in the whole continent? It was already good enough to be a good audience. In the first 3 days, Lu Li did just do his duty as an audience. He wandered around the research facility, looking around as he walked, but he didn't say a word. When some arrogant researchers asked him a provocative question, he just laughed it off and never responded. However, just when everyone thought that the 6th elder of Lingjian School was going to become an invisible person in the laboratory, Lu Li finally made his move. The first thing was to overturn the 3 upcoming research plans at the morning meeting of Taoist Master Shifang. He spoke with confidence and composure in front of everyone's surprised and even frightened eyes, clearly pointing out the shortcomings of the research plan and giving his own alternative plan. After a long discussion, Taoist Master Shifang and other experts reluctantly admitted that Lu Li's version was obviously superior. The second thing was that Lu Li selected 5 relatively marginal cultivators from Taoist Master Shifang's team, formed his own research team, and took over the most difficult part of the whole research plan. Of course, Taoist Master Shifang would not rest assured to hand over the core content to outsiders, so he also led the cutting-edge team to carry out the same research. 3 days later, the result was clear, and Lu Li came up with the perfect result 1 step ahead of time. At that time, Taoist Master Shifang, who was still 2 steps away, almost passed out in the laboratory. It was not until this time that Taoist Master Shifang and the others suddenly realized an important fact. Lu Li, this person? In the past 200 years, he alone supported most of the academic research of Lingjian School. Although these research results had never been able to stand at the forefront of the immortal cultivation world of 9 regions, from another perspective, Lu Li had completed the work of a team of other sects with his own strength, and the result was not bad. If such a talent had the research platform of the 10,000 Arts Sect, what kind of terrifying energy would erupt? Therefore, regarding Lu Li, people's question was no longer whether this lowly person had the qualification to follow the cutting-edge research of the 10,000 Arts sect, but when Lu Li, a peerless genius, could leave the lowly Lingjian school and join the embrace of the 10,000 Arts sect as soon as possible. Fellow Taoist Lu Li, although I have said it once a few days ago, I have to say it again. Please join the 10,000 Arts sect. Only in this way will your talent not be wasted. If you are not chained to the Lingjian school, but come to my 10,000 Arts sect, I'm afraid the highest academic research award would have long been soft in your hands. Fellow Taoist Master Shifang, have you ever thought that if I were not in the Lingjian school, how could I have the opportunity to grow to this point? The entire research resources of the 5 uniques are completely used by me, and I have no less than any other researcher. Moreover, now let's focus on the right place. The results of the identification of the components of the inverse G-Saurus pillar should have been summarized, right? Taoist Master Shifang sighed with some regret, and then nodded and said, "It has been integrated. As you expected, the inverse G-Saurus pillar. As the name implies, it is a biochemical building based on the inverse G-Saurus pillar. Its core lies in the strange species of the immortal world, the inverse G-Saurus pillar. Contrary to the G-Saurus pillar in the Tomb of Immortals, the inverse G-Saurus pillar does not create something out of nothing, but turns something into nothingness. And this magical characteristic can only be possessed by the inverse G-Saurus pillar, which is very difficult to replicate in a bionic manner. Sure enough, that is to say, the situation still falls into the expected category. Without the inverse G-Saurus pillar, there is no way to build the Tower of Heaven. But the inverse G-Saurus pillar does not exist in 9 regions at all. Where are we going to find the inverse G-Saurus pillar? Lu Li pondered for a long time and said, "Is there really no such thing? Even if there is no complete one, there is still a part of it." Taoist Master Shifang was stunned for a moment and said, "Do you mean, such a big pillar in the southern heaven region is basically made of the inverse G-Saurus pillar? If I can cut off a relatively complete section, I am sure that I can extract all the elements of the inverse G-Saurus pillar and restore it." Extract the elements of a living thing from a dead thing? Oh, by the way, 20 years ago, I have read fellow Taoist's article on extracting the elements of the Great Desolation era from the amber. My senior brother sect leader once said that if this research goes in depth, it may be possible to build a Great Desolation era park. Since fellow Taoist has such a foundation, perhaps this matter is really feasible. So, these madmen want me to lead the army to the southern heaven region to cut a piece of the inverse G-Saurus pillar for them? Sure enough, they are a bunch of bastards. Don't they have any brains? At this time, the dazzling golden king of the western continent was sitting on the high dragon throne, flipping through the file in his hand with extreme irritation. While scolding, he threw it out forcefully and said, "Night King, you wasted my time just to read this boring thing?" The file that was flying in the air was picked up by a delicate white hand. Aya took back the file and calmly said, "This is the only way. The only way. This is just the only way to save Wang Lu. And for the sake of a mere Wang Lu, you want me to send the main force into the dark battlefield in the southern heaven region, which has long been occupied by the fallen immortals, to break through the layers of defense and destroy their core building?" Aya still calmly replied, "Saving Wang Lu is the only way to win this war. Gil, don't try to be brave, you have done a good job. In the past half a month, you have led us to repel the 5 invasions of the fallen immortals in the lower realm, which can be called an unprecedented feat. So why do you have to find Wang Lu to come back? You know it yourself. You can't hold on in this war for long, right? Gil, there are only 2 of us here, so put away your disguise. You don't have to show off your golden light to me." Golden King slanted his face and was silent for a long time. Finally, he leaned back and withdrew the golden light outside his body, and then revealed a variegated light. That flawless set of pure gold full-body armor was modeled at this moment. It was divided into countless pieces of gold, silver, and bronze. It was a tragic sight to behold. Although led by Xingjing sect, during this period of time, your wealth has been replenished as much as possible. But the wealth of 9 regions is not in line with your path. For example, the Emperor's dragon throne is neither fish nor fowl for you. Dragon is the symbol of supremacy in 9 regions, but in our land, it is just a relatively powerful creature. Not to mention that the dragons in the 2 continents are not the same. Gil, you are not so much the Golden King now but more like... Aya paused and didn't continue, but Golden King sneered, "Ragged King?" Humph, I have long heard this sentence from some bastards behind my back. Yes, in this foreign land I can't hold on for too long. But that doesn't mean that your suicide plan has any meaning. Aya said, It's not suicide. You don't need to send people to carry out this task. 9 regions has found the right person. You just need to provide them with some help. The right person? Aya turned sideways, revealing a figure that was extremely strange to Golden King. Yin Xian, successor disciple of Lingjian school, greets Golden King. Chapter 825. In the memory of Golden King, the name Yin Xian was stored in a very remote corner, almost no different from dust and grass. If Yin Xian didn't have the title of successor disciple of Lingjian school, Golden King would not remember this kind of trash at all. However, as the saying goes, a reputation is not as good as a meeting. This time, Golden King found that there was a big deviation in his understanding of Yin Xian. Is the stench of this fallen immortal running dog deliberately provoking me? Yin Xian said, I dare not, it's just that, the identity of the running dog of the fallen immortal is more advantageous for us at present. Golden King tilted his head slightly, indicating that he was still listening. Yin Xian said, my team and I are the foreshadowing laid down by Wang Lu 15 years ago so that one day when the frontal battlefield is really unbeatable, we can disguise ourselves and open up the situation behind the enemy. Even though it seemed like an insignificant step at the time, we have been diligently preparing for it for 15 years. So far, all the preparations have been flawless. Golden King was still silent. His blood-red eyes swept over Yin Xian, and then he found that the words of the successor disciple of Lingjian school were indeed true. From top to bottom, from inside to outside, this person was completely filled with the smell of the running dog of the fallen immortal, just like a meat slave who had been trained for 10,000 years, pure and without any foreign substance. As a dog, you're quite competent. Yin Xian said, in fact, we are indeed under the name of a fallen immortal, and only by borrowing his name can we have this perfect disguise. Kanglan? After Golden King came to 9 regions, he had done enough homework. He thought for a moment and said, Kanglan has been lost in 9 regions for a long time. Aren't you walking into a trap by borrowing his name? Yin Xian said, we just borrowed the power of Kanglan and then borrowed the name of others. I wonder if you remember that half a month ago when the crack in the sky opened in Yunzhou, 3 immortals came to this world? I added, I led the crowd to fight them. Later, Gil, you detonated the Golden City and blew up the passage between the 2 worlds and the inverse Gisaurus pillar. When the 3 immortals saw that they couldn't do anything, they fled in all directions. In the end, we only captured one of them. Golden King said, the other 2, did you deliberately let them go? Yes, in this half a month, Supreme He too has already used the immortal slaying sword formation to firmly suppress the 2 of them, but he didn't make it public. Except for a few people, everyone thought that the 2 immortals were still lurking in 9 regions, waiting for the next opening of the passage between the 2 worlds. Haha, the wishful thinking of those bastards is quite interesting. Golden King laughed and then said, are you going to borrow their name and pretend to be their lackeys in the pollution of 9 regions to get close to the anti-Gisaurus pillar? Fine, since all of you want to die, how about we give you a push? Aya said, we need you to launch a feint attack on the southern heaven region. The people of Royal Soldier Sect have already made a feint attack plan. Golden King took the plan. His blood-colored eyes swept over it, and then his complexion changed slightly. Is this a feint? At this moment, Supreme Hichu's voice sounded, for most of the participants this is not a feint, but a decisive battle where everything is at stake. If we don't do this, we won't be able to hide from the immortals. If you want to deceive the opponent, you have to deceive yourself first. And everything you've done is just to welcome that guy back? Golden King laughed in spite of himself and said, are you crazy? Putting all your hopes on a half-dead person? If you all die, even if Wang Lu comes back, can he turn the tide? If he really has that ability, he won't be trapped in the passage between the 2 worlds by a small fallen immortal. Aya said, Gil, don't you trust him even now? If I don't believe in Wang Lu, I don't need to come with you. Golden King snorted coldly and said, but my trust is never unconditional. No one's trust is unconditional. If you trust Wang Lu alone, there must be a reasonable reason. Hichu, what else is hidden at the bottom of your 9 regions map? Now it's time to say it. Supreme Hichu was silent for a long time, and then his voice was transmitted again. Yes, at the bottom of the 9 regions map, there is a great immortal technique that can reverse the universe. That immortal technique was excavated by Xingjing's sect from the ruins of the Age of Desolation. After thousands of years of analysis and transformation by countless cultivators, it was finally formed with the help of the Dixian. It can be said that it is the condensation of the essence of the entire 9 regions. Then only Wang Lu can fully trigger this immortal technique, so we have to rely on him. This kind of immortal technique is ridiculous in itself. Golden King was extremely disapproving and said, but now is not the time to joke. What are you going to do? Hearing the last sentence, Aya, Hichu, In Xian, all breathed a sigh of relief. But then a deeper sadness floated on their faces. Because Golden King did ask a good question, a frontal feint attack and then a backstab. It was indeed simple and clear, but how to do it? Are you sure? Are we really going to fight? On the Royal Soldier sect, a general in white couldn't wait to ask the messenger. Yes, in 3 days the Wanxian League will launch a decisive battle in the Southern Heaven region, uprooting the largest stronghold of the fallen immortals in 9 regions. Once the reversed Gisaurus pillar in Cloud region is destroyed, the passage between the 2 worlds will be closed, and it will be difficult for them to open a new one in a short time. Enough, just tell me the specific time and place. The eyes of the general in white were bloodshot, which looked extremely frightening. I don't need to listen to your nonsense, we just need to avenge Kuchin. The messenger looked at the powerful general who temporarily replaced the position of the sect leader of Royal Soldier sect after the death of Kuchin in silence. In his eyes, there was no sign of a living person. This person's strong will to die was simply appalling. Turning his head and looking down the mountain, he saw a group of cultivators of Royal Soldier sect lined up in a neat phalanx ready to go. They were the new Red Guards army formed by the veterans of the Red Guards and absorbing a large number of substitutes. They were still uniformly deity stage cultivators, and they had also gone through extremely rigorous training. Their strength was not inferior to the old army. These cultivators wore shiny armor, pure white robes, and their right arms were uniformly tied with a black scarf. A deathly stillness and austere atmosphere pervaded the entire Royal Soldier sect. As the saying goes, a burning army is bound to win, and the strongest army in 9 regions has completely degenerated into a burning army. Every battle must be won and every attack must be taken. However, the messenger only felt a deeper melancholy in his heart. The prestige of Supreme Kuchin in the army was really speechless. In fact, most of the members of the Red Guards were not the old team of Royal Soldier sect, but people drawn from other sections. However, after Kuchin's training, they became more loyal subordinates than the soldiers of Royal Soldier sect. Now they even sacrificed everything to avenge Kuchin. This was an army that was doomed to never return. When the battle plan was specified, they did not hesitate to mark their fate. And they seemed to have accepted their fate a long time ago. Understood, I wish you a prosperous martial arts. The messenger Hua Yun nodded to General Shen Wei, but her eyes were already slightly red. Decisive battle? Are you crazy? In Kunlun Mountain, Supreme Jury slapped the table and stood up. In a march to war, it is necessary to have the right time, the right place, and the right people. Now, which one do we have? Do we dare to fight the fallen immortals to the death? If we are careless in this battle, we will lose everything. And what is the purpose of taking such a huge risk? As the messenger, Feng Yin Taoist master did not answer this question directly, but asked another question. Kunlun Mountain is not willing to participate? Supreme Jury said, Kunlun is the sect closest to the origin of immortal path in 9 regions, which can be traced back to the Desolate Age. Kunlun Mountain almost means the history of immortal cultivation in 9 regions, and history must not be cut off. Supreme Feng Yin smiled helplessly and shook his head. He was not surprised by this result. Supreme Jury was indeed such a person and Kunlun Mountain indeed had such a culture. In short, are you guys going to put your own safety before things go awry? Someone has to choose to put their own safety before things go awry. Supreme Jury looked at Feng Yin without showing weakness and said, someone has to leave the hope for 9 regions, even if it's only the tiniest trace. This is the way of survival of Kunlun Mountain for countless years. Bastard. The next moment, a gust of wind rolled up on Kunlun Mountain, and a stooped old man suddenly appeared in front of Jury. When Supreme Jury saw this person, his pupils involuntarily contracted violently. South Pole Immortal One? Jury, you just said that the way of survival of Kunlun Mountain is to linger at death's door and put your own safety before things go awry? I don't remember teaching you such shameful words in the past. The next moment, the old man, who had a lifespan of nearly 5,000 years, suddenly swelled up and turned into a burly giant man. With one palm, he knocked Jury down from the top of the mountain and into the deep valley. The longevity of Kunlun Mountain is by no means for survival. Do you still remember what the ancestors of Kunlun Immortal Mountain said? Kunlun Mountain will always represent the fundamental interests of the vast number of cultivators in 9 regions. This sentence was later interpreted and enriched, creating generations of theoretical classics. Remember, as the ancestor of all immortals, our Kunlun Mountain has always stood at the forefront to protect our younger generation. In the valley, the roar of South Pole Immortal Wang surged for a long time. Understand. Supreme Jury's voice could not hide the exhaustion. Supreme Feng Yin, on the other hand, made a deep bow to South Pole Immortal Wang. What? Want to set up an investigation group to go to the Southern Heaven region's collapse field? Ask us if we want to participate? Are you kidding me? Do you need to ask this kind of question? Of course we want to participate. Quota? Of course, as many as we want to participate. This is a rare academic feast. Any qualified disciple of 10,000 Arts sect will never miss it. But the risk of this trip, if you're afraid of the risk, why are you still doing research? Alright, don't talk nonsense. We're going to prepare the equipment for the investigation. Do you want to have lunch here? If not, I won't send you off. Chapter 826. Final Battle? Are they crazy? In the extreme darkness of the Southern Heaven region, Leitian and Shueiyue, the 2 immortals, widened their eyes and incredulously looked at the 9 regions' army that had gathered outside the domain of destruction. Under the dazzling and exaggerated golden light of Golden King, the true appearance of the decisive battle army of 9 regions was shown. The scale of this army was unprecedented. In the center, Golden King and the Western Continent Army, the Death to Immortal Sword Array personally presided over by Supreme Hichu, the Reborn Red Guards, and the Zaku Army led by the Nine-Tailed Fox. On the battlefield alone, this was a powerful force that even the immortals felt a faint fear. Not to mention that behind this army was the indomitable great array of the 9 regions. With Tetragon and the remaining Dixian as the core, all the cultivators in the world participated in it, converging into an invincible surging force. In a head-on confrontation, even someone as strong as an immortal venerable would die on the spot. However, seeing this scene after a moment of wavering, Leitian and Shueiyue felt a heartfelt ecstasy. Quickly go and report to Senior Immortal that the people of 9 regions are finally willing to die. No matter how the people of 9 regions put together their strength, they could not compete with the immortal world on the battlefield. Even the immortal world that was now despised as the fallen immortal world. The immortal realm was indeed in decline. Compared with the real realm of immortals in its heyday, the so-called immortal realm today was nothing but a broken piece of rubble. The army of the immortal realm, which had once conquered the myriad worlds and was always victorious, had also withered. There were no more than 100 immortals who could put up a fight and a dozen or so immortal paragons, and now a few of them had been killed and immortal kings had not appeared in the public eye for a very, very long time. However, the immortal world was, after all, the immortal world. The 10 senior immortals alone were enough to turn the 9 regions upside down. What's more, in addition to the immortals, there were too many treasures in the immortal world, such as the reverse Gisaurus pillar. In the previous battles, because the immortal world had too many concerns and did not want to spend too many resources, they were able to fight back and forth with the 9 regions. They were even repelled several times and suffered considerable losses. But now that the army of 9 regions had gathered in front of them, there was no room for mediation in the immortal world. After this great battle, they could launch a great purge, and then the 9 regions would truly fall into the control of the immortal world, and everything would usher in a turnaround. Thus, with a joyful mood, Shueiyue immediately returned to the celestial realm through the tunnel behind her. However, the moment she stepped onto the land of the celestial realm, she saw a devilishly handsome young man standing there. She was momentarily dazed and almost bumped into him. However, when she regained her consciousness, Shueiyue immediately sweated profusely and knelt down without hesitation. "Greetings, Senior Immortal Xiaoyao." "Oh, no need to be so reserved." The immortal named Carefree raised his hand, and Water Moon felt an irresistible force lift her up. Then she flew uncontrollably towards a white jade palace tens of thousands of miles away. That was the frontline base for the immortal world's Great Purge plan. All the resources were concentrated in the white jade palace. "Tell the other immortal sovereigns the news. I'll stay here and watch for a while." Shueiyue knew that she had no room to argue. She obediently followed the immortal technique of Senior Immortal Xiaoyao and flew forward. The distance of tens of thousands of miles was almost instantly covered. However, when she looked back along the way, she saw Senior Immortal Xiaoyao's unprecedented concentration. Is it necessary to be so serious? It's just a group of lowly beings in the lower realm. Even if there are more of them, they are just a mob. With a little doubt, Shui Yu had already arrived in front of the White Jade Palace. In the White Jade Palace, several immortal sovereigns had gathered together. When they saw Shui Yu coming in, their expressions were different. At the moment when Shui Yu came in, the memory in her mind had been read by several immortal sovereigns, so everything that happened in the lower realm was clear to them. One of them, a tall man in a blood-colored battle robe, clenched his fist hard. What an unexpected surprise. This group of lowly beings actually sent themselves to our door. This really saves us a lot of trouble. However, a silver-haired woman was somewhat disapproving. Fengyan, don't think the enemy is too stupid. If they are really stupid enough to send themselves to our door to seek death, the Great Purge would have already been carried out. I think there is a mystery hidden in it. It's not the time to be optimistic. Senior Immortal Fengyan laughed and said, Senior Immortal Qinglu, you're too careful in everything you do. It's just a lower realm, why do we have to be so tied up? If we could put all of our troops in when the passage was opened and the reversed Gisaurus pillar was thrown, 9 regions would have been barren by now. I really don't understand what Xiaoyao is worried about. Even if the Swanxian realm has withered, it's not like we can't even take down 9 regions, right? Compared with the Burning Legion or the Na-6 that we encountered in the expedition to the other world, I really can't see where 9 regions is strong. An old man gasped and said, the strong point is that it is the foundation of our immortal world. No matter how far we go on the immortal path, the starting point will not change. Since this land can give birth to immortals, it can never be underestimated. Senior Immortal Fengyun spread out his hands and said, forget it, I don't understand the thoughts of you old seniors. You are the generation that grew up in the immortal world, so you can't understand the feelings of us ascenders. The old man said softly, many people say that those who can transcend the tribulation and ascend must be the best. In fact, it's really absurd. When I first entered the immortal sect 50,000 years ago, there were countless people who were more talented than me. Even when I finally ushered in the tribulation of ascension, I still knew a lot of experts. They just didn't want to take that step, not that they really couldn't do it. But those people are already dead. Senior Immortal Fengyun still showed great respect for the old man. He scratched his head and said, without the purification of pure immortal spirit, the lifespan of a cultivator will not exceed 10,000 years. Senior Lifeng, you have been cultivating for more than 50,000 years. No matter how powerful your companions were in the past, they are now just a handful of bones. What's more, 9 regions has been extracted by us once and now it has long been broken. Haha, it's ridiculous that that group of waste thought it was the will of heaven and kept shouting about the age of chaos. From the upper realm they're just like ants. Since you're so confident, then you'll take the lead later. With that, Senior Immortal Xiaoyao slowly entered the arena, and then very naturally sat on the main seat of the White Jade Palace. It stood to reason that only the Immortal King was qualified to sit on this seat. However, when Senior Immortal Xiaoyao took his seat, no one questioned it. Under 1 person and above 10,000 people, this was the status of Xiaoyao. This time we'll go all out. Senior Immortal Xiaoyao set the tone. I've observed that 9 regions has indeed sent out all their elites without any reservation. This time it's a decisive battle. Therefore, when we make our move, we must have the momentum of a thunderbolt and annihilate all their forces in one battle. The several senior immortals were silent for a while. After communicating in private by various means, none of them raised any objection. Only Senior Immortal Qinglu lightly asked, how is His Majesty the Immortal King? Of course His Majesty is fine. Xiaoyao turned his gaze and asked, why do you ask? Senior Immortal Qinglu said, I'm just thinking that His Majesty the Immortal King was once the most warlike and the most powerful person in the immortal world. Even if he is old, he shouldn't be indifferent to such a good battle. It's just the dying struggle of a group of arrogant and ignorant people. There's no need to trouble His Majesty. Senior Immortal Qinglu asked, is that so? I heard that His Majesty was plotted against and seriously injured. Nonsense. Senior Immortal Xiaoyao's face remained unchanged. His handsome face was as firm as a stone sculpture. He said, with His Majesty's strength, who is qualified to hurt him, even if it's a sneak attack? Senior Immortal Qinglu said, I heard that the people in the lower realm detonated a fragment of an innate treasure. Who did you hear that from? Senior Immortal Qinglu covered her mouth and said with a smile, this is a woman's secret. Senior Immortal Xiaoyao wouldn't want to find out, right? I don't need to ask as long as you do what you should do. With that, Senior Immortal Xiaoyao turned his face and looked at the others saying, do you need to ask anything? The others naturally didn't need to ask. Very well, then everyone please lead your team to the battle. After the senior immortals were dismissed in the White Jade Palace, most of them immediately went to gather people and prepare for the battle in the lower realm. However, there were two people who were much slower. Lai Feng and Qinglu. Senior Immortal Qinglu, did you ask those questions just now casually, or do you mean something else? Senior Lai Feng, what do you think? 9 regions is just a scabbard. The real problem comes from us. Lai Feng said unceremoniously, if it was in the 10,000 Immortals period, it wouldn't take so much trouble to clean up the 9 regions. There's the passage between the 2 worlds and the reverse Gisaurus pillar. Now, the dilapidated appearance is really our own fault. If it was in the 10,000 Immortals period, the immortal world didn't need to rely on foreign objects, and there would be no need to carry out the Great Purge of 9 regions. Qinglu shook her head and said, Senior, what I want to say is, what happened to His Majesty the Immortal King? Like Feng Yun, I am a younger generation immortal born in the immortal world. Since I was born, I have rarely seen the Immortal King. Almost all I saw was Senior Immortal Xiaoyao carrying out the Immortal King's order. Is there really nothing wrong with this? Today he said that the Immortal King would not make a move. I really don't understand. Not long ago the little princess fell in 9 regions. As her father, how could the Immortal King ignore it? Senior Immortal Lai Feng was silent for a long time, and then said, It's better if you don't ask too much about this matter. It's not bad for you to be confused. Very well, then let this junior ask one last question. If you have to choose between Senior Immortal Xiaoyao and His Majesty the Immortal King, who would you choose? Senior Immortal Yefeng's answer was, I'll pretend that I didn't hear such treasonous words. Oh, thank you for your answer. I think I probably understand. Let's go to 9 regions to experience it. At the same time, somewhere far away from 9 regions and the immortal world. Wang Lu concentrated on controlling a needle-tip-sized flying sword, avoiding the small fireballs coming from all directions. The speed of the flying sword and the fireballs was extremely fast, especially those fireballs which either turned or accelerated, blocking the flying sword's path. After a while, Wang Lu's flying sword was hit by the fireballs and burned. Well, the most difficult barrage only lasted for a while. It's really a big ominous sign. Before he could finish his sentence, another impatient voice sounded, Are you crazy? Can you find a wife if you play this kind of brainless game every day? Wang Lu smiled and said, It's hard to say whether I can find a wife or not, but the synchronization rate has been improved to about 80%. Don't look at me with such deep hatred. Leisure is also a key factor in the improvement of the synchronization rate. In the past 15 years I've been trembling with fear. There's hardly a day of rest, but it's already dark under the lamp. On the other side, Wang Wu, who was sweating profusely, just sneered. However, just as she was about to brew her words, Wang Lu's face suddenly changed and became serious. What's going on in 9 regions? Wang Wu noticed that his hand was shaking slightly. How could so many people suddenly die? Finally, it's almost over. If nothing unexpected happens, Spirit Sword Mountain will usher in the end within 7 months. So, I'm here to shamelessly ask for a monthly ticket. I hope the last month can go smoothly. Chapter 827. In the passage between the 2 worlds, the sudden change in Wang Lu made Wang Wu a little nervous. What's going on? Wang Lu was silent for a while and then said in a deep voice, Something happened in 9 regions. The names in the Book of Life and Death are disappearing at an alarming rate. The Book of Life and Death, the thing that monitors all the cultivators in the continent, did you really use it? And it works here? Wang Wu was a little surprised, and then her face sank. A large number of names disappeared. Is there a second possibility? Wang Lu was silent. After a while, he shook his body and said, I also hope that there are other possibilities. For example, the space barrier between the passage between the 2 worlds and 9 regions is reblocked, so the Book of Life and Death is ineffective. But unfortunately that's impossible. There is only one possibility for the names in the Book of Life and Death to change. That is, this immortal treasure has made contact with 9 regions and received the change in information. And the direct disappearance of a large number of names can only mean one thing. Has the immortal world launched a general attack? Maybe, but it stands to reason that the immortal world should not make their move so soon. They have always been very cautious about their actions in 9 regions. When I sent the Gate of All Realms into the immortal world to detonate it, I vaguely felt that the immortal king was seriously injured after being plotted against. Before he recovered from his injury, the immortal world should not act so rashly. Did I underestimate the overall strength of the immortal world and the seriousness of the situation in the immortal world? When Wang Lu said this, he clenched his fists and said, "This time, being trapped in the passage between the two worlds is really a mistake." Wang Wu shook her head and said, "It's meaningless to blame yourself too much now. At that time your choice can't be said to be wrong. If you must blame it, you can only blame Yen Luo for being too cunning." Before she finished speaking, Wang Wu found that her comfort was meaningless, because Wang Lu didn't pay attention to what she was saying at all. His attitude seemed to be very shaken, far from his usual calmness. Of course, this was not difficult to understand. In order to pursue the synchronization rate with the giant divine weapon, his mood had repeatedly fluctuated. His immortal heart cultivation was indeed not very stable, and it was very easy to be shaken by external factors. Moreover, the current situation had a special meaning for him. More than 200 years ago, it was the same person who supported the great Liang alone. It was the same person who watched helplessly as his brothers and sisters died one by one. It was hard to imagine how a person could endure the same torture twice. Thinking of this, Wang Wu also felt a slight pain in her heart. Looking at Wang Lu's body swaying in pain, she felt that she had to do something. No matter how many ridiculous things Wang Lu had done to her these days, at least in this life she was his master. She should shelter him from the wind and rain. Of course, the current situation was extremely dangerous, and it wasn't something that anyone could resist. But at the very least, she should stand behind him and provide him with gentle care. However, I don't have a clue about being gentle and caring. Have I ever been gentle in my life? It's so hard for me to suddenly do something like this. Forget it, I'll use my imagination. Thus, Wang Wu gradually disappeared into the darkness of the passage between the two worlds with a belly full of contemplation. In this regard, Wang Lu was unaware of it. He just stared intently at the Book of Life and Death, looking at the names that quickly disappeared on it, trying to restore and infer the truth in his mind. What kind of war could make the 9 regions pay such a heavy price in an instant? Even if it was an all-out war in the immortal world, was there no room for strategic depth in a place as big as 9 regions? And why did the number of people disappear so evenly? The cultivators of different legions in different areas were dying out at almost the same speed. This meant that not only the immortal world was engaged in an all-out war, but the 9 regions had also mobilized all its forces to face the enemy on the battlefield. However, this was unreasonable. Any sane person would not fight a head-on war with the immortal world. Once the immortal world arrived, the first thing to do was to evacuate everyone. And then what? Wang Lu smiled bitterly. If he was down there, perhaps he would also be helpless. His comprehensive strength was not as good as the others, and the only person who had a chance to reverse the situation was hung in the sky. How could this situation be broken? How could it be broken? However, just when Wang Lu was gradually discouraged, the disappearance of the names in the Book of Life and Death suddenly slowed down a lot. Judging from the change of those names, the situation of the war should have changed in a favorable way. The mainstay cultivators were no longer sacrificed and were replaced by cannon fodder. At this point, it meant that the occupation had finally returned to the control of the 9 regions. Wang Lu took a deep breath, closed his eyes and operated the deduction technique to the extreme. Suddenly, a white smoke rose from the top of his head, and in his mind, the panoramic view of the 9 regions gradually emerged. Although many details were still vague and difficult to distinguish, Wang Lu could generally grasp the change in the war situation. After a fierce battle, the 9 regions side began to retreat in an orderly manner, while the immortal world side was obviously unable to catch up. Or if they chased a little bit fiercely, they would be hit head-on. It should be Supreme Hichu who personally presided over the death to immortal sword array, which was the most powerful means of attack in the 9 regions at present. The 3 immortal swords, Extinguish Immortal, Trap Immortal and Kill Immortal, should be handed over to Zhan Zai, Xiang Liang and Xianghua respectively. When the 3 of them drove the test machine, their combat power was comparable to that of a supreme. Under the blessing of the death to immortal sword array and the great array of 9 regions, they were even more unstoppable. In addition, it should be the Western Continent Army led by Aya who covered the retreat of the main force. These foreign reinforcements were not registered in the Book of Life and Death, but Aya's name was placed in a conspicuous position by Wang Lu. Since the beginning of the retreat, Aya's name had been constantly shaking, like a fallen leaf in the wind and rain. However, after many twists and turns, she finally stubbornly left a thick ink mark in the Book of Life and Death. It was just that the process was difficult, which showed the danger of the situation just now. Aya had always been a head-on person. At the beginning of the war, she didn't fight desperately, but instead fought desperately when retreating. Obviously, she bore great pressure as the guardian. Since Aya was like this, Golden King would not stand idly by. Right now, it could be said that he and 9 regions suffered together. Then, the Zaku army was completely dispersed and organized into different legions. In order to use the Zaku army unity array, the several key props that were needed were still in Wang Lu's hands. After the division, the one responsible for the specific command should be Golden King, because it was necessary to use the many different functions of Zaku to play a core role in each team. This required an extremely high command ability. After the death of Kuchin, almost no one in 9 regions could have this qualification. Even if a few people had the ability, their prestige was not enough to convince the masses. Only Golden King, the arrogant and conceited supreme leader of Western continent, could rely on his unreasonably terrifying command ability to control everything. In her letter, Aya once mentioned that when she was in Western continent, she played military chess with Golden King. In 10 games she lost 10 times. The relationship between victory and defeat seemed to have broken away from the normal logic of cause and effect. At the beginning of the battle, the result was already doomed. And this gap in ability was the gap between Aya, the king of Bretonia, and Golden King, the supreme leader of Western continent. Golden King's reinforcement was really a stroke of genius. At this point, Wang Lu suddenly felt a sharp pain in his head, and the battle map in his mind disappeared. This was the result of a large overdraft of computing power, which meant that it was difficult to recover the deduction in a short period of time. However, there was no need for him to forcibly deduce anything. Judging from the current situation, 9 regions had not fallen into the worst situation. Although the casualties were heavy, which could be said to be a serious injury, the foundation was still there, and they still had the capital to continue to fight against the immortal world. Of course, after this battle, the time in 9 regions was getting more and more urgent. If Wang Lu could not break the space barrier and return to 9 regions as soon as possible, perhaps he would never have to go back. When he thought of this, he suddenly heard the voice of Wang Wu behind him when he felt a little annoyed. "Little Lu, don't always find trouble for yourself. Come on, I found something for you to relieve your boredom. Let's play to relieve your anger." At that time, Wang Lu could not help but laugh in spite of himself, thinking, this guy is really broad-minded. Even at this time he still has such a carefree bird appearance. Of course, that pure smiling face was the goal of his unremitting efforts in his 2 lives. However, when Wang Lu looked back and saw Wang Wu and the toy in her hand, his face suddenly sank. "Are you kidding me?" Wang Wu was a little surprised. "Why do you say that? What's that in your hand?" "Yanlua's body. Didn't you say that you want to dig a pit and bury it? I just dug it out. Look, it's still very fresh. The soft places are soft and the hard places are hard. It's indeed the body of an immortal. Even the smell is quite fragrant. What the hell are you licking? I'm asking you, why did you dig this thing out?" Wang Wu looked inexplicable. "What else can I do? I want to whip the corpse to vent my anger." Whip the corpse to vent my anger? When did I say that I wanted to do such a thing? Do you still need to say it? I can see that you are in a bad mood now, just like a long-term constipation patient. Even your normal thinking ability has begun to be affected, so I helped you to do psychological counseling. Hee, aren't I very gentle and considerate? Wang Wu shrugged with a smile, completely ignoring Wang Lu's widened eyes. She threw Yanlua's body over and said, "Play with it. If you get tired of it, quickly return to normal. We don't have much time left. We have to go back to 9 regions as soon as possible. What's the point of playing with this thing except to make me a complete pervert?" Wang Wu said with a smile, "Why do you ask such a stupid question? How could you not know that the more perverted a person is, the more powerful he is?" Wang Lu looked at the woman in white in front of him and thought that what she said was indeed true. At least, this guy was an excellent example. On the other hand, he was indeed a little moved by what she said. Corpse abuse? Although it was indeed very tasteless and disgusting, Sun Booping might have done it in the past. If it was for the synchronization rate, perhaps he should give it a try? Let's continue to ask for the monthly votes. It's getting closer and closer to the end. Because the monthly votes list has been combined, you can vote for both Chidian and QQ reading. Friends who have accounts, please vote for 2 to commemorate it. Chapter 828. To torture or not to torture, this was indeed a question. Looking at the extremely fresh immortal corpse on the ground, Wang Lu could not help but fall into deep thought. This was the first time he had carefully observed Yanlua's corpse. Previously, he had hastily buried her after killing her, so he did not think too much about it. But now, Yenluo had been seriously injured before she died, so there was a huge and terrifying hole in the waist of the corpse. Many places were completely scorched by the positron cannon, but there were still places that should be there. If he had to use it, it could still be used. Not far away from him, Wang Wu was intently observing Wang Lu's every move. She was the one who suggested the idea of torturing the corpse, but she actually did not want to see Wang Lu put it into action. It was necessary to relieve pressure and adjust his mood, but it was another matter to do so by hook or by crook. A person might really be more powerful the more perverted he was. However, if he embarked on the path of perversion in pursuit of strength, and eventually lost his sense of self, that would be putting the cart before the horse. In the past, Wang Lu did not need others to remind him of the meaning of the bottom line. However, over the years, in order to pursue the synchronization rate, Wang Lu's temperament had actually been greatly shaken. Wang Wu wanted to see what his current situation was like. Could he still control himself? Of course, even if Wang Lu did not control himself in the end and carried out his perverted behavior, Wang Wu did not intend to stop him. No matter what decision he made, she would be a strong supporter. Even if it was a path to purgatory, she would accompany him to the end. But if possible, it was better to take the normal path. Under Wang Wu's gaze, Wang Lu finally made a move. He leaned down, stared at Yenluo's corpse seriously, and then stretched out his hand. Damn, so direct. Wang Wu immediately exclaimed. In her impression, little Lu, who was not very open in the matter between men and women, had actually learned the trick of opening the door and showing her chest. He stretched out his hand and pressed it on the other party's chest. Wang Lu completely ignored the clamor behind him. His right hand paused for a moment on the slightly bulging chest of the corpse before moving all the way to the neck, jaw, lips. Only when it reached the wound on the forehead did it finally stop. Then he asked, "What do you think if I resurrect her now? Although your principle of not abusing corpses is admirable, don't you think that this is putting the cart before the horse?" Wang Lu said, "What's the point of torturing corpses? Does bullying things that don't know how to talk really make people feel better? I was doubtful about that. No matter how I thought about it, it would be more fun to torture a living person, right? Yenluo put me in such a difficult situation, but I killed her with a sword. It was too easy." "Alright, but the dead can't be resurrected. How do you plan to resurrect her?" Wang Lu said, "I checked just now and was sure of one thing. The way of existence of immortals is completely different from ours. At least this Yenluo can no longer be regarded as a human being in the strict sense." Wang Wu went up and glanced at Yenluo. She curled her lips and said, "Just because her breasts are not big, you deprive her of her right to be a human being? Aren't you too cruel? But now that little Ling has become a fox, I'm not afraid of accidentally hurting her. I mean, Yenluo's immortal body makes her life form very unique. What we see now is not only her physical body but also her primordial spirit. Or she doesn't have a primordial spirit in the traditional sense at all. She's like a mechanical puppet, and about half of her physical body is still preserved." Wang Wu thought for a while and said, "If you re-inject vitality, even if it can't be restored to its original state, it can be restored in a short time. But first, are you sure that you can exert enough force to make this stop machine move? Second, if you really resurrect her, are you going to fight Xiaoyu again?" "Of course, I'm sure about the first question. As long as it's something like an elixir, it's enough to activate her. As for the second question, Xiaoyu won't come." Wang Lu was very sure, he won't jump into a dead end. And isn't it better if he really comes? It's also quite fun to fuck that old thing again. If I can also use the projection of the Shenyuan sword empty-handed, then I'll make a big profit. That's right. The dignified immortal king shouldn't be stupid enough to let you kill his projection avatar at will. Since you've made up your mind, just do it. I'll protect you." Wang Lu smiled, and then the skin on his fingertips suddenly separated. A drop of bright red blood dripped from it and fell on the broken gem on Yenluo's forehead. That was the essence of Wang Lu's origin. Any drop contained the vitality of more than 10,000 people, but at this time, it was only given to Yenluo alone. The next moment, the long-dead gem on Yenluo's head suddenly trembled. The crack was like a living thing, completely absorbing Wang Lu's blood. The gem fragments gradually softened, wriggled, stuck together and continued to fuse. Finally, it became a clear and flawless crystal gem. At the same time, Yenluo opened her eyes. "It's you?" Yenluo didn't seem to be surprised by her resurrection. She, who had been reborn, still looked very weak and had no intention of fighting with force at all. "Yes, it's me. How does it feel to be resurrected? It's very subtle. I seem to have forgotten a lot of things. Yenluo nodded, closed her eyes to meditate for a while, and then chuckled softly, but from the current situation I succeeded. If you still have a place to go, you won't waste your time on a dead person like me. Wang Lu said, I won't waste any time on you now, so you don't have to look at me with such expectant eyes. I won't rape you and I won't let her rape you. If you want to experience the pleasure, you can only do it yourself. I woke you up to ask you a few questions. Yenluo smiled and said, Why should I answer? Because you have no choice. Wang Lu said and clenched his fists, which immediately made Yenluo show a painful expression. Since you have been resurrected with my blood, you can't go against my will anymore. Tell me, how much do you know about Sun Buping? Wang Lu had wanted to ask someone this question for a long time. If he wanted to synchronize with the giant divine weapon, it was necessary to understand Sun Buping's life. However, even his wife, Tetragon, could not say that she fully understood him. After decades of running in, they had only pushed the synchronization rate to 70%. As for the rest, they had to fill in the gaps through other means. As the lifelong enemy of Sun Buping, the fallen immortal side was naturally an excellent source of information. Sun Buping. He was one of us, but after living in 9 regions for a long time, he chose to betray us. Yenluo's voice was a bit stiff. He is a traitor without a plan and is doomed to despair in the abyss of blood and fire. That's it? Wang Lu was a bit dumbfounded. You should be a small leader in the immortal world, right? You're the one who was possessed by the immortal King Xiaoyu. How come the information is so blocked? Why should I know such a trivial thing? Yenluo said, the Dixian camp established by Sun Buping is only famous in 9 regions. The immortal world has never put him in their eyes. This is really a sad story. Wang Lu sighed and said, you don't know about Sun Buping, so tell me about the immortal world, especially about the immortal King Xiaoyu. Tell me as much as you know. Yenluo suddenly seemed to struggle very much. She shook her body desperately, but she was completely unable to get rid of the control of Wang Lu. She could only grit her teeth and say what she knew word by word. The immortal king and Xiaoyao know. When she said the 6th word, Yenluo's voice suddenly stopped, and her whole white jade-like face turned red and purple. With a muffled bang, her face exploded into pieces. The secrecy measures of the immortal world are really powerful. Wang Lu was stunned as he reached out to remove the pieces of flesh and brain on his clothes, but this is also a confession. What is the dirty thing between the immortal king and Xiaoyao? Don't tell me it means impotent? However, no matter what it was doomed to not get the answer at this time. After Yenluo's head exploded, her body was completely destroyed. No matter how great her ability was, she could not be resurrected. Wang Wu, who watched the whole process, could not help but shake her head and said, as a result, it seems that there is no gain from your hard work. There is basically no new information about Sun Buping, and the immortal king and senior immortal Xiaoyao are also confused. It seems that it's a bit of a loss to waste a drop of your precious blood. It's not that there is no gain at all. For example, Sun Buping struggled all his life, but in the eyes of the immortal world, he is just an ant. It's impossible for him not to have any thoughts about this. Another example is the immortal king's possession of others at will. Does senior immortal Xiaoyao know about it? If he knows, what would he think? If he doesn't know, is it possible that he doesn't know? While saying that, Wang Lu frowned. Because each of these 2 questions seemed to hide a great secret. However, the truth was shrouded in a layer of fog, and no matter how hard he tried, he could not see it clearly. So Wang Lu once again fell into contemplation. His mind, which had just cooled down, began to work at a high speed again, trying to piece together the complete truth from the limited information. These 2 questions. Intuitively, they were really important. This time he didn't know how long he pondered. After all, Wang Lu was not omniscient and omnipotent, so he never found the answer. During his contemplation, the passage between the 2 worlds suddenly trembled slightly. Then, countless people's surprised voices exploded in the passage, awakening him from his contemplation. It's connected, it's finally connected. Wang Lu, can you hear us? I know you can hear us. Wang Lu, when will you come back? The voices from countless old friends of the Wanxian League made Wang Lu slightly stunned. You've built the Sky Tower? The answer to him was the voice of Feng Yin, weak, tired, but full of hope. Yes, the Sky Tower has been erected in Spirit Sword Mountain. Relying on the guidance of the Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman in your hand, we finally opened a gap in the space barrier. Then, as long as we expand this gap, you can come back, right? Wang Lu nodded and said, yes, it's been hard on you this time. However, as soon as his voice fell, Wang Lu saw that the gap that had just been opened in the passage between the two worlds quietly closed again. I'm afraid it's not that easy to get Wang Lu back. The voice of Senior Immortal Xiaoyao abruptly came in. Chapter 829. The dawn of hope only illuminated for a moment before it was swallowed up by the darkness. Senior Immortal Xiaoyao resealed the gap in the passage with a tyrannical and irresistible force. The voice from 9 regions fell silent with the disappearance of the light. In the passage between the two worlds, only a young man who looked as handsome as a demon was left. I've wanted to meet you for a long time, but I didn't expect it to be in this way. Wang Lu or Ouyang Shang? Wang Lu looked at the person in front of him and frowned slightly. You really know a lot, my brain-dead fan? Senior Immortal Xiaoyao smiled and said, in a sense, I really admire your willpower. You traveled around the world in the form of a remnant soul and then returned to this land of death. If it were me, I'm afraid I would linger on halfway and forget to return. In your long journey, you have really experienced several wonderful places in the world. You can be like a fish in water in it, and your achievements are no less than those in 9 regions. Moreover, there is no world-ending crisis there. No matter how long the hands of our immortal world are, they can't reach too far away. So why did you come back? For the woman around you? For this land or for the sense of mission? Wang Lu did not answer, but looked at the person in front of him more solemnly. Senior Immortal Xiaoyao knew too much. No one in 9 regions knew about his experience after the death of Ouyang Shang and before the birth of Wang Lu. Even he himself had many vague memories. However, Senior Immortal Xiaoyao seemed to know it like the palm of his hand, which was really unreasonable. Don't doubt it too much. I read the fragment of the Gate of All Realms and got the coordinates of countless worlds. I didn't accompany you to complete that journey, and I didn't see your privacy. Wait a minute, have you read the fragment of the Gate of All Realms? Wang Lu immediately caught the flaw in this sentence. The Gate of All Realms was brought to 9 regions by Mr. Feng Yu from the immortal world. Then, in the self-explosion of Ouyang Shang, it accompanied his remnant soul to travel around the world and then return to 9 regions. Wang Lu used it as a hidden weapon to plot against the immortal King Xiaoyu. And there seemed to be no room for Senior Immortal Xiaoyao to intervene. There are some details that you don't need to care so much about. Otherwise, you won't even be surprised and the conversation won't be able to continue. By the way, fellow Taoist over there, you don't have to be so wary of me. I'm just an avatar of Senior Immortal Xiaoyao. Let alone fighting against the 2 most powerful cultivators in 9 regions, I'm afraid even Taoist Master King Pil can destroy me. As Senior Immortal Xiaoyao said, his eyes shifted and happened to meet Wang Wu, who was hiding in the shadows. Wang Wu remained indifferent, and she still insisted that her disguise hadn't been seen through. The immortal sword in her hand concealed its edge, and it was ready to erupt at any moment. Senior Immortal Xiaoyao shook his head indifferently and said to Wang Lu, I asked you to come here not only to see you but also to tell you a few things. Wang Lu asked curiously, a few things? What do we have to talk about? Of course there is. Seeing this, I'm more relieved. I think you've already guessed a lot of things. Senior Immortal Xiaoyao happened to see the body of Yen Luo on the ground. He walked forward with a little regret and said, Can I keep her body? Wang Lu was silent for a moment and then asked, Can she still be resurrected? Senior Immortal Xiaoyao said, Strictly speaking, her whole head has been destroyed, so after the resurrection she will no longer be herself, but a backup that she made with me before she went to war. Backup. Senior Immortal Xiaoyao didn't explain and continued, Resurrection out of nothing can also be done. However, Yen Luo is my trusted subordinate and has made great contributions. I can't let her body be exposed here. Wang Lu said, Yen Luo? Is she an artificial life? Considering Yen Luo's previous resurrection and her mechanical puppet-like body structure, Wang Lu really didn't think that she could be regarded as a human being. Senior Immortal Xiaoyao said, Oh, of course Yen Luo is a human being, a living person. Artificial life has never been successful in the real sense. Many people think that immortals are omnipotent, but this is obviously impossible. If immortals are really omnipotent, why can't they even protect their own home? Why do they have to absorb the power of 9 regions? Some laws are the truth of heaven and earth, which even Swan-Xian people can't disobey, such as the creation of life. We can create lifelike puppets, which will run for thousands of years without weakening in power. At the same time, there are countless magical abilities, but after all, they are not human beings. However, you have also found that Yen Luo is very different from human beings in the real sense. In fact, most people in the immortal world are already like her. Although they are human beings, they are very different from human beings. You can guess where the difference is? Can she be possessed by the immortal king? At this moment, Senior Immortal Xiaoyao showed an unusually sincere smile. Sure enough, you're worthy of being the person I'm optimistic about. Since you've found it, it's convenient to talk about some things. You should understand that there are many things that even I can't say. When Wang Lu heard this, he suddenly felt that the fog in his mind began to dissipate, revealing a bit of his ferocious true appearance. In that case, why don't we talk in the form of mutual questions? The smile in Senior Immortal Xiaoyao's eyes became more intense as he said, "Okay, you go first." Wang Lu thought for a while and cautiously raised the first question. Previously, Senior Immortal Paksu said that in order to prolong his life, the immortal King Xiaoyu occupied the body of his own bloodline descendants, such as Xia Xiaohe. But Yanluo is obviously not his child, so why could she be possessed by him? How much does Yanluo's special life form have to do with the immortal king's possession? Since it was about the immortal king, of course, Senior Immortal Xiaoyao could not answer directly, so he asked another question. Just now, I said that there are supreme laws between heaven and earth that no one can transcend. So do you think that even in the immortal world, can anyone break the supreme laws and achieve true immortality? What are the consequences of forcibly trying to break through the supreme laws? Upon hearing this question, Wang Lu inwardly understood. No one was immortal. Even the immortal king could not break the constraints of this supreme law. His struggle was futile, but it caused all kinds of side effects. For example, Yanluo's non-human life form was probably one of the side effects. At the same time, Senior Immortal Paksu thought that Xiaoyu only possessed his own bloodline, but Yanluo's experience proved that the scope of the immortal king's action had long been expanded. Then, is there no objection? Let's not talk about what the people of Xia family think. Is Yanluo willing to be used as a vessel by the immortal king? Senior Immortal Xiaoyao then raised another question. Why do you think I came here with my avatar? Why do you think I can read the information on the fragment of the Gate of All Realms? Another fog in Wang Lu's mind was dispelled. His avatar came here to act in secret. He forcibly closed the passage between the two worlds using the power of his own body, which was also a show for others to see. His avatar, on the other hand, was to act in secret. And why could he read the fragment of the Gate of All Realms? Of course, it was because after the Gate of All Realms was sent back to the immortal world by Xiaoyu, it had passed through the hands of Senior Immortal Xiaoyao. Since Senior Immortal Xiaoyao could read the information on it, of course he should also be able to detect the tricks that Wang Lu had done in it. If he could remind the immortal king in time. No, it should be said that since even he could detect the abnormality on the fragment, Xiaoyu could certainly detect it. But in the end, Xiaoyu was still seriously injured by the self-explosion of the fragment of the Gate of All Realms. What did this mean? Did Senior Immortal Xiaoyao do anything in it? The answer seemed to be self-evident. Wang Lu's heartbeat began to accelerate slightly. The news brought by Senior Immortal Xiaoyao was really unexpected. If it was true, this almost desperate war finally ushered in the greatest dawn. However, it was a matter of great importance and could not be easily believed. Wang Lu asked, "Why did you tell me this? You are a senior immortal, I'm afraid you don't need to worry about being possessed, right?" This was also inferred from his previous experience. Among the several immortals in the lower realm, Kanglin had been studied for 15 years. The mystery of Senior Immortal was almost clear at a glance, but Wang Lu never found that his body composition was similar to Yanluo's. In addition, Senior Immortal Paksa did not show any signs of being possessed until his death. Only Xia Xiaohe and Yanluo, two immortals below the Senior Immortal level, were possessed by Xiaoyu. Senior Immortal Xiaoyao smiled when he heard this and asked an almost irrelevant question. "What do you think the immortal world should be like?" Wang Lu said, "For most cultivators, it is a place where countless ideals gather. In fact, the immortal world was once glorious." Senior Immortal Xiaoyao's tone was flat, but it constantly revealed sadness. The immortal world in its heyday was second to none in the world. Even the gods of the Western continent had to bow down to the immortal world. But now, there are only more than 100 immortals, and the immortal world has almost fallen. They even have to pin their last hope on the lower realm. What do you think caused this huge gap? Upon hearing this, Wang Lu almost sucked in a breath of cold air. There was only one answer to Senior Immortal Xiaoyao's question. The immortal King Xiaoyu needed to bear the responsibility for all this. When he thought about it carefully, it seemed that everything was reasonable. An old immortal king who wanted to live forever, and a ghost father who would do anything in order to survive, even his own daughter. Under the leadership of such a person, how could the immortal world not decline? The law of heaven and earth could not be violated. The longer a person lived, the higher the price needed to prolong his life when he was about to die. If the immortal king had already reached the end of his life, then the price of continuing to maintain his life was probably, and the purpose of Senior Immortal Xiaoyao's trip was also clear. Do you want to use me to get rid of the immortal king, the biggest scourge? That's a good idea and I'm very interested. Then from now on, please take care of yourself. Senior Immortal Xiaoyao said and stretched out his hand. At the same time, a gap appeared in the barrier of the passage between the two worlds. I'm an immortal, a loyal subject of the immortal king. I won't cooperate with you to do anything. Senior Immortal Xiaoyao said seriously, if you have any unreasonable expectations, it will only waste your remaining hope. Wang Lu said, there's no need to remind me of this. I don't believe any of you and I won't let any of you go. Die in peace, I will give you a quick death. Oh, that's a big tone. Let me wait and see. Xiaoyao said, lifted the remaining body of Yen Luo, and flashed away along the gap in the space barrier. The next moment, the voice from Spirit Sword Mountain sounded again. Wang Lu, when can you come back? We can't hold on any longer. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.